For the first time in history, we are going to take a fully colorized tour through the famous house of the Mrs. Astor, New York's leading member of high society during the Gilded Age. Hi everyone, Ken here. Welcome to this house. In the late 1800s, society was changing. New money families now had fortunes that rivaled the legacies of old money. With this shifting dynamic, the once exclusive members of high society were faced with the reality that times were changing and that, in order to stay relevant and wealthy, old money would have to mix with the nouveau riche. Mrs. Astor had been the leader of New York's high society, famously controlling who was allowed into the exclusive and lavish club of the elites. This group was known as the 400, being a nod to the amount of people in New York who were suitable to enter a ballroom, which, coincidentally, was the number of people who could fit inside the ballroom of her brownstone. As families like the Vanderbilts rose to prominence, their presence in Manhattan threatened the very fabric of Mrs. Astor's society. The nouveau riche barons of industry began building palaces lining Central Park, while Mrs. Astor's once-renowned mansion became viewed as outdated. She felt as if her mansion was no grander than a doghouse by comparison to her new neighbors. Not wanting to lose her influential grip on society, she purchased a lot at the corner of 5th Avenue and 65th Street and hired leading Gilded Age architect Richard Morris Hunt to design for her a limestone palace that would forever intrigue future generations. The chateauesque style double mansion was divided down the center as a duplex, with her residence on the north side and her son's residence on the south side. In the spirit of fierce competition to reign over New York, no expense was spared. The house was constructed from limestone blocks and accented with copper gutters and finials. All about the facade, intricate carvings graced each architectural element, blurring the lines between architecture and art. Without further ado, I present to you for the first time in history, the Mrs. William B. Astor house in full color. First we will enter Mrs. Astor's side of the double mansion and arrive in the stair hall. Light pours in through a leaded skylight, reflecting from the polished marble floors and walls, while gilded picture frames glisten in golden hues. From here we will be ushered into the reception room to await the arrival of our host, Mrs. Astor. Assuming we are here to attend a formal event, we will head straight back to the ballroom, where gilded picture frames hang on red velvet walls. This magnificent space could hold 1,200 guests on its herringbone marble floors, and above us, statues reach out as corbels to support the oversized cove ceiling as it rounds into the skylight. As we mingle with guests, we will explore the white and gold drawing room. Each wall panel has been framed by gilded plasterwork concealing mirrors, allowing the drawing room to bounce light around as if it were glowing. The dining room, with its dark color scheme, is the pinnacle of fashion for this time, and sitting behind Mrs. Astor's place at the table, a statue of Venus looks over her shoulder, a nod to her former residence which was configured in the same manner. In Mrs. Astor's later years, she slipped down the red velvet runner on her marble staircase and never did recover. When she passed away in 1908, her son John Jacob Astor IV combined both sides of the double mansion and renovated it to create one of the largest palaces to ever line Central Park. We will enter through the newly configured Great Hall, clad in marble and supporting a wrought iron dome. From here we will make our way through the gallery, as our footsteps echo from the marble floors through the tile mosaic groin vaults overhead. This brings us to the reception room, where his mother's white satin rose chairs are staged above a rug woven with the feathers of peacocks. First we will enter into his library, complete with gilded old-growth wood paneling. The walls are decorated in framed centuries-old European tapestries, and scattered about the room are priceless antique Chinese porcelains set on each surface. The dining room, with its marble walls and floors, rests below a gilded frieze, and while accounts vary of the color of the marble, the room is no less dazzling. John transformed his mother's drawing room through extensive renovations, adding gilded corbels in the form of angels along with intricate wall murals in each paneled section. While these rooms are open to artistic interpretation, I have done my best to colorize them based on the few surviving detailed descriptions of each space. And before you flood the comment section telling me these are AI-generated images, I will ensure you that I have hand-colored them, and I can demonstrate that for you. When I open one of these pictures in Photoshop and select the Colorize tool, this is what AI can do. Obviously, this is not great, nor does it follow the descriptions of each room. I went through and tediously hand-colored each photo over the last few months in my free time until the collection was complete. This project of colorizing each photo was not an easy one, but it is one that I believe is crucial for bringing history to life. Seeing color photos of Mrs. Astor's mansion helps us connect with the past and more tangibly understand the impact of her lasting influence on American society. If you were offered everything you ever wanted, would you accept? Hi everyone, Ken here. Welcome to this house. Today we are exploring the mansion of Emily Grigsby, or more importantly, how she earned the nickname the American Princess. It's important to first understand where Emily came from. She was born into a dwindling fortune. Her father died when she was still very young, and her mother Susan tried her best to keep up appearances. Susan could no longer afford to hold on to her upper middle class lifestyle without her husband's income, so she came up with a scandalous plan to make her own fortune in the shadows. First, she sent her 2 kids away to school. Her son Braxton would attend St. Mary's Seminary in Dayton, Ohio, while Emily would attend an Ursuline convent in Brown County, Ohio. Meanwhile, Susan spent what little money she had to open a high-end brothel in Cincinnati. The money came pouring in, and Susan was able to afford to keep the family house and continue sending her children to private school. The charade of a wholesome family would go on for many years until Susan was discovered to have been running a brothel. She was shunned from society, and the nuns at Emily's school informed her about her mother's business dealings. By this time, Emily was becoming a formidable young lady at the age of 16. She was keen to American and European history, was cultured in the arts, and could maintain a conversation with any member of high society. As Emily began to blossom, she became the talk of the town. Ellen Dunlap Hopkins, a member of New York's high society, wrote about her. "I think she was the most beautiful woman I ever saw. Her eyes were brown, her hair had the reddish gleam of gold, her face sad in expression, her complexion like alabaster. Her form was beautiful. She had the manner of an empress." Emily had been refining herself for her entire life, yearning to be at the top of society. So it came as no surprise that when her brother Braxton got his first job with millionaire Charles Yerkes, that she saw an opportunity. She began flirting her way into the upper echelon, catching the attention of every prominent young gentleman. Charles Yerkes' son, Charles Jr., was so enamored with her that within months of their meeting, gossip had spread, speculating about an impending engagement. But Emily had bigger plans. Charles Jr.'s father was worth $25 million, or the modern-day equivalent of nearly $900 million. Even though Charles Sr. was married and Emily was only 16, she had noticed the perverted gaze of the old man. When she glanced back, she was not disgusted, but instead saw opportunity. Emily was said to have been in love with Jr., but he wasn't the one with the large pocketbook. She would return Charles Sr.'s glances, and in no time, she became his mistress, much to the chagrin of his heartbroken son. Charles was in the process of uprooting his life to move to Manhattan and would not leave without Emily. Of course, the affair had to be kept under wraps for sake of his reputation, so he built her own personal palace just 2 blocks away from his. Emily's house would be built at the corner of Park Avenue and 67th. It would be only 20 feet deep, but 100 feet wide and 5 stories tall. The imposing facade was composed of white granite set below carved stone balustrade with a tiled roof boasting peaked dormers, cresting, and finials. No expense was spared for his secret lover. By the time the palace was finished, Emily was now a young adult. Regarded as the most cultured woman of her age, Charles trusted her to decorate her own house and promised her the world. Emily held him to that promise. She set out to acquire antiques from every culture along with art from the masters. Lillian Barrett said about Emily's house, "Her home was indeed beautiful, not the gorgeous, dazzling type that vaunts its wealth, nor the soulless kind that argues the decorator, but beautiful with a beauty that bespoke an innate delicacy in its owner, a good taste that was the outcome not of a few years' education and travel, but of the culture of centuries." The library was decorated with wood paneling on the walls, with hidden doors to conceal her collection of rare and expensive books, each book having been rebound in leather and stored out of sight. The dining room was surrounded by wainscoting and decorated with Flemish tapestries. She had acquired other tapestries that were already several centuries old at the time and had them cut up to upholster her high-backed chairs. The house boasted painted canvas wall panels, with one of the guest rooms containing 15 needleback tapestries which she paid $15,000 apiece for, or the modern-day equivalent of about $500,000 apiece. More stunning than the guest room was her music room. It expanded across the entire 4th floor and contained some of the best in her collection. One of the chairs was inlaid with ivory, too brittle to ever be sat in, but stunning nonetheless. The centerpiece was an ornately carved Vernis Martin piano, with every visible part having been gold-leafed. Each room had its own presence. Another bedroom had been nicknamed the Rose Room and was furnished in the Empire style, bearing the insignia of Napoleon Bonaparte. Her own bedroom would be more subdued and timeless even by today's standards. The wall panels were crafted from old-growth walnut which had been imported from Italy and contrasted by her prized collection of blue and white Chinese porcelains. Set poetically in the center of the house, above the stair landing, was a life-size portrait of Emily herself. She continued to hold dear her mother who was still running a brothel, though having her mother involved in the seedy profession pained her, so she paid to have her relocated to be with her in New York. Emily now had the house of her dreams, and the stage was set for her to enter high society, and she did so in fashion. She obtained a box in the Metropolitan Opera House and impressed the most elite of society. Gossip spread about her travels in Europe, about how she would rent entire trains to haul her antiques as she went country to country, acquiring the rarest and most expensive pieces for her collection. Everything was going well. She was the most beautiful woman in high society with seemingly unlimited funds. She was bold and could confidently engage any man in the room in academic discussion. She was regarded as the best and brightest in New York social circles, but people wanted to know, who is this mysterious young lady? Why is she more educated than the men who attended Harvard? Why is she wealthy, and where did the money come from? Emily kept the mystery alive for as long as possible, adding to the fire of gossiping conversations, until one day, when she was discovered. News broke that her mother owned a brothel, and she was the mistress of Charles Yerkes. Emily was done for. No one wanted to associate with her. She had been cut off from New York's high society. Emily knew she could do better than New York's high society. She wanted to be world class, but this would have to wait just a little while. Charles had become very ill and spent his last days in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel instead of in his home. He did not permit his wife to see him, but instead requested that Emily cater to him as a nurse. He passed away, not leaving anything to Emily in his will, but it did not really matter. He had spoiled Emily over the years and had ensured that no matter how much she spent, she would never run out of money. Emily set out for London, where she would be welcomed into the social circles of old money and royalty. She became friends with dukes and duchesses, lords and ladies, being invited to the most exclusive dinners with the world's most elite. The Times ran the headline, "Ignored here wins royals," with the article saying, now she can boast that Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle are her domain by right of conquest, and she snaps her fingers at the plutocrats who hit her and turned their back upon her. She was now in Windsor Castle and Buckingham Palace, cozying up to the royal family. Emily became close with Princess Mary, who was 14 at the time. Princess Mary was quite fond of Emily, because she would treat her as a little girl and was not intimidated by her status. The royal family took notice of this and welcomed her with open arms. She was the perfect role model for Princess Mary, a confident woman of conviction, class, and elegance, articulate and educated, gracefully demanding respect. Both Emily and her mother were invited to the coronation as the special guests of the king and queen. The papers in New York reported this, and it did not take long for word to spread across the pond about Emily's mother's shady business. The royal family, dismayed by the news, put out a statement about Emily's attendance at the coronation saying her presence was officially unknown, as they began to distance themselves from her. Emily returned to New York to sell her palace, antiques, and art collection, which included Claude Monet's Highlands of the French coast. She returned to London with an exorbitant amount of cash. While her new friends were initially shocked by the news, they quickly learned to overlook her mother's past and welcomed Emily back into society. In 1926, the Grigsby Mansion was torn down to make way for the Metropolitan Life Insurance Building, designed by York and Sawyer. Emily's old life was officially gone. Charles was dead and her mansion had been demolished. She would live out the rest of her life in London, staying naturally beautiful, her skin never showing her age and her hair retaining its golden copper glow. Despite her looks and the lifelong interest from royal suitors, she never did marry. She was said to have died happy in 1964. Her dreams had matured as she did, and so they changed as she did. She accomplished her goal of climbing to the top of society, and along the way, she made real friends. She read throughout the morning and laughed with friends over a bottle of wine in the evenings. Emily was a breath of fresh air in the old money circles, and conversations were said to have been lacking for many years in the absence of the American princess. If you have been subscribed to this channel for a long time, you might have noticed that this video was a remaster of the old one. The biggest mansion you've never heard of was once called the finest estate between New York and Chicago. Sitting on over 3,500 acres with nearly 1,000,000 square feet of finished interiors, this estate will blow your mind. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore this house. Ohio Columbus Barber, who understandably just went by OC, was born into a working-class family in a modest Ohio village known as Middlebury. His father made matches by hand, so OC dove right into the trade, leaving school as a teenager to sell matchboxes from a horse-drawn wagon. Determined and confident, with a type of charisma that only comes from being over 6 feet tall, he became a partner in the family firm before he was even 21. By the early 1880s, his barber company was one of the biggest match producers in the nation, and in 1881, he orchestrated a massive merger that formed the Diamond Match Company, which soon controlled nearly all match sales in the country. In 1891, he founded the city of Barberton with the dream of building a modern community that served both industry and residents alike. A few years later in 1894, he shifted his main factory there, churning out hundreds of millions of matches every single day. These roaring successes funded a whirlwind of new endeavors. He formed rubber and steel companies, organized an extinguisher business to tackle factory fires, and even helped start Akron City Hospital. He was the kind of man who, if he spotted a problem, instantly set out to fix it, whether it was finding better ways to manage industrial processes or addressing dangerous health conditions in his factories. By 1905, Barber's attention turned to a brand new project, a scientific farm of sorts on 3,500 acres just outside of Barberton. In 1909, he poured his energy and fortune into building a sprawling estate called the Anna Dean Farm, named for his daughter Anna and her husband. He didn't hold anything back. He built 35 elegant buildings, installed the latest farming technology, opened the grounds to the public on Sundays, and even built an extravagant 52-room mansion crowned with a glass-topped elevator. Newspapers declared it the most impressive residence between New York and Chicago, which would prove to be an understatement to say the least. While hundreds of craftsmen worked around the clock, the mansion sprang up at a rapid-fire pace. Within a year it was nearing completion, with hardly any scaffolding left for artists to leave their touches. Day in and day out, caravans of horse-drawn wagons could be seen carting trees around the property, until finally, the only thing left to do was watch the grass grow in. Now with the estate completed, let's begin our tour from the street, entering near the gatehouse. Traveling about the property, we will cross bridges and pass by some truly incredible outbuildings. It would be impossible to wind our way through all 3,500 acres, so we'll skip ahead to the main attractions, starting with barn number 1. Then off in the distance, beyond fields of flowers and vegetables, we spot 2 massive towers. As we come in closer, we see barn number 3 starting to come into focus. Traveling around its sprawling wings, we get a closer look at the exquisite masonry, which allowed his farm animals to live in style. Though he did keep most of his animals separated, the colts had their own barn, the pigeons had a massive pigeon house with room for thousands, and the pigs had their own palace known as the piggery. Even ducks were treated to the lap of luxury. Beyond the duck pond, the duck department ensured the population remained healthy and happy. But the estate wasn't just set up for animals. The hundreds of full-time staff also farmed the fields and kept a flour mill running. The orchid house made sure that the mansion would always be stocked with fresh flowers, and the powerhouse ensured a steady flow of electricity to the entire estate. While there were dozens of other buildings, we can go ahead and make our way to the mansion, taking in some scenic views along the way. As we near the house, we can see it peeking up from a gentle knoll beyond the tree line. Continuing closer, we skirt the pond and get a clear view of the back of the house. But this is not where we'll enter. We'll continue around until we find the drive taking us towards the front. Finally, we can see the house in all its grandeur, begging us to come inside and explore. But before we make our way through the front doors, let's zoom out just to appreciate the sheer scale of this 52-room mansion. Swinging open the front doors, we pass through the vestibule to find the main hall, clad in stone with heavy relief work on each corbel in the frieze. All along the wall, life-size figures have been painted in murals, replicas of works by François Boucher on display in the Louvre. Though had we looked straight ahead from the front door, we would have seen the grand staircase, each step a marble slab with stained glass windows framed by fitted stonework. Off to our right, we'll find the living room beyond glass doors. This is our view as we step over the threshold onto a tiger skin rug, seeing glass-paned bookcases lining the walls and an incredibly intricate coffered ceiling soaring overhead. This is the largest room on the first floor, acting as both the living room and the library. Following the bookcases along the wall, we see a set of French doors that don't quite match. This will take us to the solarium. In the summer months, the windows might be removed to allow for a shaded outdoor patio, and in the winter, you could continue to enjoy the room with a fireplace to keep you warm. Now, had we turned the other direction in the main hall, we would have seen a fireplace at the very end of it, marking both the elevator and the entrance to the service wing. But to the right of that fireplace, we would have found a set of French doors opening into the billiards room. and to the left of it we would have found the dining room furnished with pieces OC had purchased at the St. Louis World's Fair. Interestingly, for this time period, the formal dining room is unobstructed from the breakfast room, where the family would have enjoyed more casual meals. There are a couple of other rooms on the first floor, including a service wing and OC's office. There is also a formal reception room, but the main hall was simply too enticing to not skip over this formality. Let's make our way back to the grand staircase now and begin heading upstairs. The ceiling height shrinks by a few feet, however, the finishes remain just as opulent as what we saw on the first floor. Up here we'll find OC's bedroom as the largest room on this floor. We'll also see a number of other bedrooms, including his wife's room. Not including servants' chambers, there are 5 bedrooms on this level and a gymnasium, as well as several bathrooms. And up on the 3rd floor there are 5 more guest suites and several bathrooms as well. But the showstopper on this level is the ballroom, which follows the same footprint as the living room. He and his wife could easily host 100 guests in just this one room alone. Over the years, OC remained a larger-than-life figure in his community, splitting his time between running businesses, welcoming friends to lavish gatherings, and seeking out new projects. When he passed away in 1920, he left behind hopes of turning his farmland into an agricultural college, but he hadn't finished structuring his will to fund it in time. The entire estate changed hands and continued to remain in nearly one piece until the 1960s. By this time, the mansion itself had been widely neglected, with maintenance being deferred. Plans were put in motion to demolish the mansion, which sparked protests from the local community. Unfortunately, nothing could be done to stop the inevitable. Architectural elements and furnishings were stripped from the mansion and sold off in a tag sale, which drew out crowds of hundreds. With the mansion left in shambles, it was time for it to be demolished. Even so, the town of Barberton continues to bear his name, and a few Anodyne farm buildings remain standing as lasting tributes to his unshakable drive. From humble boyhood days selling handmade matches to shaping an entire city, O.C. Barber proved that big ideas backed by relentless energy can light up more than just the tip of a match. If you had 56 wives, how big would your house have to be? Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we are exploring the palatial estate of Brigham Young. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. Brigham Young, the second president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, emerged as a Moses-like figure, leading his followers across the vast wilderness to the Salt Lake Valley. This exodus was not merely a journey across physical landscapes, but a flight from persecution and violence. The Mormons, as they were commonly known, had faced intense hostility in the East. From Missouri to Illinois, they were met with suspicion and aggression, culminating in the martyrdom of Joseph Smith, their prophet and founder. Young's ascension to leadership marked a turning point as he sought a sanctuary where his people could practice their faith without fear. Young emerged as the voice of stability and direction, leading the Mormon pioneers westward in an exodus from Nauvoo, Illinois to the Salt Lake Valley. This journey, fraught with peril and imbued with a sense of divine mission, would cement Young's place as a Moses-like figure in Mormon history. His leadership during this period was not just spiritual, but logistical, demonstrating an uncanny ability to organize and motivate a dispersed people towards a common goal. Upon arriving in the Salt Lake Valley in 1847, Young wasted no time in laying the foundations of what he envisioned as a new Zion, establishing Salt Lake City. He was soon appointed as governor of the Utah Territory and oversaw the establishment of settlements throughout the region, promoting self-sufficiency and communal living. Under his direction, the Mormons built roads, bridges, and irrigation projects as he played a crucial role in the early development of the Transcontinental Railroad. Yet his tenure was also marked by authoritarian rule and conflict with the U.S. government, culminating in the Utah War. The Utah War, a confrontation between the Mormon settlers and the United States government, was a pivotal chapter in this struggle. The federal government, wary of the growing power of the Mormons in the practice of polygamy, sent troops to Utah in an attempt to impose federal authority. Young, ever the defiant leader, prepared his people for resistance, declaring martial law and demonstrating that the Saints would not be subdued easily. This conflict, though resolved without significant bloodshed, underscored the precarious position of the Mormons in the American melting pot, caught between their fervent belief in divine guidance and the realities of federal opposition. Young's personal life was as complex and controversial as his public one. A staunch polygamist, he had at least 56 wives and fathered 57 children, a practice that drew scorn and fascination in equal measure. His teaching on race and the priesthood, particularly his prohibition against black men becoming priests, would cast a long shadow over the LDS Church, sparking debates and divisions that lasted well into the 20th century. The trek to found a Mormon state was fraught with hardship, yet it was imbued with a sense of divine mission. Young's vision for his community was not just survival, but the creation of a Zion in the wilderness, a utopia where the saints could flourish. This vision extended to the construction of the Gardo House, a project that began under Young, but was inspired by an earlier concept from Joseph Smith, the Mansion House in Nauvoo, Illinois. Smith's Mansion House was intended as a welcoming home for visitors, a place of gathering that reflected the community's hospitality and openness. Young's Gardo House, with its grandeur and elegance, was to be the embodiment of this vision in the heart of Salt Lake City, a testament to the Saints' triumph over adversity. However, the construction of such a mansion in a land still raw from the pioneers' toils did not come without its critics. The Gardo House became a symbol of the complex dynamics within the Mormon community, reflecting both its aspirations and its internal tensions. It was a palace amid the desert, a physical manifestation of Young's authority in the church's hierarchical structure. Yet it also stood as a point of contention, a reminder of the sacrifices many had made and the ongoing struggle for acceptance and survival in a state at odds with the nation. Just as the house was nearing completion, Young passed away in 1887, never having the opportunity to enjoy the palatial estate. Entering the Gardo House, you would pass through a set of double doors encased by intricate millwork. Directly in front of us, the grand staircase, carved from black walnut, sweeps along a rounded wall. We will see more of this incredible work of art when we continue upstairs, but for now, let's return to the first floor and begin exploring. To begin, we will enter the drawing room where the bay window is framed by fluted pilasters and complemented by extensive hand stenciling on the ceiling. This lavishly decorated and abundantly ornamented home continues past marble fireplaces through concentric arches. The music room is crowned by a plaster ceiling and gilded frieze, the proportions of the room dwarfing the grand piano. Turning around, we begin to gain a sense of just how colossal these rooms are, with the drawing room's bay window appearing almost miniature from this point. Continuing into the double dining room, and despite its size, it was designed to seat around 60 dinner guests or wives when the leaves were in place. We can gain a better sense of what this might have looked like when only one of the dining tables had been properly set. The fine china we saw on the table was stored in the butler's pantry, which was far larger than most of the era due to the unique marital situations within the church. Moving along, we can then pull back velvet curtains to reveal the library, which has been decorated with geometric hand stenciling bordering layers of gilded crown molding. The library was specifically designed to host foreign dignitaries for in-depth conversations and to convey the wealth and influence of the LDS Church. Though if a visitor was not yet impressed, a stroll through the art gallery might just do the trick. Before we head upstairs, we can take a peek at the finished basement, another rarity for the time, to find the billiards room. But there's still much more to see. Let's begin making our way upstairs. The second floor stair hall doesn't have a single right angle, as every corner has been rounded, something which required extensive craftsmanship. Traveling through the stair hall, it becomes abundantly apparent that the house required a vast fortune to construct, much of which was paid for by the church's tithes. Let's continue down the long hallway and begin exploring the bedrooms. Young's bedroom, which is perhaps one of the more understated bedrooms in the house, was never slept in by him. But many of the other bedrooms, such as the Goulds room, would play host to the house's next occupants, John Taylor and his wives. John Taylor took over Young's role as president of the LDS Church after Young's passing. He originally did not wish to live in the house, rejecting it in favor of a more humble lifestyle, but much to his chagrin, the church voted to make the Gardo House the official residence of the president and forced him to move in anyways. After continuously being raided by the federal government, he was finally allowed to move out and gave control of the house to his sister, Agnes Taylor. It eventually went on to house the next president, but by this time, the church was facing steep taxes due to the passing of the Edmunds-Tucker Act. Between taxes and maintenance, the Gardo House became too expensive for the church to hold on to. They sold it to the Holmes family for use as a private residence. The family enjoyed the house for several years before attempting to sell it, and when they put the house on the market, no buyers could be found. They abandoned the property, and it quickly fell into disrepair. By this time, the land had become too valuable for a vacant building to occupy it, so it was torn down in 1921 to make way for the Federal Reserve. How did California's largest mansion end up buried below a neighborhood? Hi everyone, Ken here. Welcome to this house. In 1826, James Flood was born to poor Irish immigrants on New York's Staten Island. Growing up, he dreamed of becoming rich, but knew that people like him could only dream. After graduating the 8th grade, he left school to apprentice for a carriage maker, a job where he could make an honest living and, if he were lucky, he could one day move up in the company and make enough to provide for a family of his own. After nearly 10 years of making carriages, the reality started to sink in. He would never make enough money to live comfortably. Around this time, stories of men striking it rich in the gold rush began to circulate. With nothing to lose, James, now 23 years old, took what little money he had been able to save and headed out west. Though he did not strike it rich, he was able to find a handful of silver and gold nuggets to bring home with him. Now that James had a little bit of money, he decided to propose to his longtime sweetheart back in New York. Mary Leary said yes, and in no time at all, the couple said I do. Feeling luckier than ever, James and Mary moved to San Francisco and continued searching for gold. By 1857, they had given up on the idea of finding enough gold to retire on, so James invested most of his savings in opening a saloon with his new business partner and friend, William S. O'Brien. The business grew rapidly, and by the next year, they had sold the saloon and used the profits to open a stock brokerage. This endeavor went pretty smoothly for James and William, and by the next year, they were ready to expand. They joined forces with a mining engineer and a mine superintendent and shifted their interest from California to Nevada, where silver had just been discovered. The team pooled their money together to purchase claims and issued stocks, giving them enough buying power for what would come next. By 1873, the business partners were able to purchase a majority stake of the Consolidated Virginia Mining Company, and later in that same year, their investment paid off more than they could ever have imagined, with the uncovering of the Comstock lode. Not only did they find silver in the mines, it would become the largest lode in history. The Big Bonanza, as it was called, consisted of a silver core stretching 1,200 feet deep into the earth. When James announced the discovery, the mines were valued at $1 billion, the modern-day equivalent of over $25 billion. What followed was a frenzy in the stock market, and James saw an opportunity to manipulate the price of stocks as he learned new information about his mines. When it was all said and done, the mine produced about 1/10 of its estimated value before becoming unprofitable. But with his insider knowledge, James was able to cash in long before the mines became unprofitable. Starting in 1875, he diversified his fortune by buying up real estate and founding the Nevada Bank with William. This series of events culminated in cementing James Flood's place in the top 100 wealthiest Americans of all time. With his wealth, he set out to build his dream home. He purchased a large lot in Menlo Park, modern-day San Francisco, and constructed his 45,000 square foot mansion, which he named Linden Towers. The colossal, 6-story Italianate palace was clad in limestone and embellished with intricate relief work and statuary. As we arrive from the street, the gatekeeper steps out from the gatehouse to greet us. The short side of the mansion comes into full view as we round the fountain, but we still have a long way to go before arriving at the front door. We must make our way down the winding gravel drive, meandering through lush gardens. This takes us past a herd of cows grazing in the pastures just outside of the barn. Then, reaching off into the distance, we wonder where the garden walks might take us. Looking beyond the stone sphinx, terraced gardens break away from expansive lawns until finally, Linden Towers can be seen coming into full view. Let's dismount from our carriage and make our way towards the front door. But before we go inside, let's zoom out to see the grandeur of the palatial mansion we are about to enter. Swinging open the nearly 12-foot tall front doors, we arrive in the entrance hall, hearing the echoes of our footsteps dance across the marble mosaic floor. As we look straight ahead, the main hall stretches more than 100 feet below gilded ceilings shimmering in the light of gold-plated chandeliers. To the right, the smell of old leather-bound books tempts us into the library with hand-tooled leather walls and a ceiling that has been gold-leafed between its polished ebony beams. The library feeds into the music room, where a grand piano is so well polished that it reflects the sun's light back into our faces. Directly across the main hall from the music room is the drawing room. Here we could find antique European chairs set out, one for each expected guest, and above us, on the ceiling, a dramatic, ecclesiastical mural is framed by intricate hand stenciling. Let's make our way back into the main hall, heading all the way to the end and turning left just before the door to the service wing. This brings us to the dining room, dramatically decorated with angels flying about overhead in the ceiling mural, and gilded dragons resting behind the table supporting the fireplace's mantel. Though, for a more casual dinner, the Floods could eat in their breakfast room in the service wing. Unfortunately, there are no known photos of the stair hall, Moorish smoking room, service wing, or the children's dining room, but we can continue exploring the mansion from below the dome of the second-floor stair hall. James' bedroom was decorated with an eclectic mix of styles, ranging from centuries-old furniture pieces to a unique mix of Eastlake and Baroque detailing. Mary's bedroom was more cohesive, with a matching bedroom set and a lively frieze running below murals framed by hand-stenciled borders. Her suite came complete with a large fireplace centered between windows and only the finest, hand-sewn quilts and curtains money could buy. While no two bedrooms were identical, each one bore a strong resemblance to the last, with a writing desk in the middle of each room and canopies over each bed. Once completed, Linden Towers became the largest house west of the Rocky Mountains, but even so, the flood spent very little time in it, only using the mansion to host large parties. They chose to instead live in their Nob Hill mansion in San Francisco. When James passed away in 1889, he left both of the mansions to his daughter Jenny. She had no use for Linden Towers and decided to donate it to the University of California, who later sold the mansion to James Flood Jr. After his passing, Jr.'s widow placed the estate up for auction. Developers then purchased the estate and began selling the furniture and architectural salvage. This behemoth of a mansion would have been too costly to tear down and haul away, so the house was imploded and its remains were packed into the foundation and low points around the property before new houses and apartments were built over them. Somewhere below the Lindenwood housing development are the fragments of some of the finest artisan work California has ever seen, resting on marble floors covered over with 10 feet of dirt. Mark Hopkins stands as a pivotal figure in American history, embodying the spirit of innovation and perseverance that marked the 19th century. Born in 1814, Hopkins' early years were shaped by challenge and change, including the loss of his father at a young age. This early adversity did not hinder his ambitions, it propelled him forward, fostering a resilience and work ethic that would define his career. Hopkins' journey from New York to California encapsulates the essence of the American dream. In the wake of the California gold rush, he ventured west, where he laid the foundations of his legacy. His arrival in San Francisco in 1849 marked the beginning of a series of entrepreneurial ventures, culminating in the establishment of the Central Pacific Railroad. Alongside Leland Stanford, Charles Crocker, and Collis P. Huntington, Hopkins formed what would become known as the Big Four. Their ambitious project, the construction of a railway across the Sierra Nevada, was a feat of engineering and determination that connected the country in unprecedented ways, overcoming the geographical barriers that had long divided the United States, transforming the economic landscape of the nation. Along with other members of the Big Four, Hopkins amassed a fortune through his various endeavors. This led to his legacy being intertwined with the architectural history of San Francisco. Starting in 1875, at the request of his wife Mary, Hopkins built an imposing mansion at the top of Nob Hill. So grand was the planned structure that it would take years to complete, as artists worked around the clock to detail not only its Gothic exterior, but its intricate interior as well. After 3 long years of construction, just as the house was beginning to take shape, Hopkins passed away while on a business trip. Much to everyone's surprise, and considering that he was only middle-aged, he had never created a will. He and Mary did not have any children of their own, though they did adopt their housekeeper's kid Timothy. The courts ended up awarding everything to Mary, who was intent on finishing the house. Once everything was sorted out, Mary contacted the esteemed Herder brothers to finish the interior design work. That's when she met one of their most renowned employees, Edward Francis Searles, who was young enough to be her son. Almost immediately, the two became an item, and Searles finished the house to both his own and Mary's taste. Entering the home, we pass through the vestibule where we find the walls clad in Circassian walnut with a built-in grandfather clock. Let's take the passage to the right. This leads us into the stair hall, where a grand, bifurcated staircase sweeps behind a 2-story arcade. From a frescoed ceiling framing a skylight, to a built-in pipe organ defying gravity above the grand staircase, and intricate carvings found on every architectural element, the stair hall became an instant success amongst architectural critics. Just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of this room, with each floor containing double-height ceilings, we can notice how tiny the person in the sketch appears in front of the arcade. If you were visiting the house as a guest, the doorman would escort you to the reception room to await your host. From here you might be ushered into the parlor, boasting ornate built-ins, leaded stained glass windows, and a fireplace with built-in lanterns. While we only have this one glimpse into the dining room, we can imagine just how grand it truly was, from the intricate fireplace mantel to built-in cabinets and hand-stenciled walls. Mary's bedroom continues with these grand displays of artisanry, with a large ceiling fresco soaring above Eastlake furniture. Some of the photos we have been seeing are from the house's next chapter when it served as the Mark Hopkins Institute of Art, such as the massive art gallery we are seeing now. Once again, to truly appreciate the scale of this room, we will refer to a drawing showing the art gallery as it relates to the rest of the mansion. After the Mark Hopkins mansion was completed, Mary and Edward married each other in 1887. Just 4 years later, Mary passed away, and the entirety of the Hopkins estate, including real estate, stocks, and tens of millions of dollars, skipped Timothy Hopkins and was inherited by Edward. This led to a lengthy legal battle in which Edward admitted to the court that he proposed to Mary in part for her money. Nonetheless, the court sided with Edward, which left Timothy with nothing from his adopted parents. While it has never been proven, there were rumors that Edward had been having a secret affair and had been living with a lover around the time of Mary's passing. Timothy allegedly blackmailed Edward, who ended up privately settling the matter for a few $1,000,000. At this point, the San Francisco mansion was conveyed to the Mark Hopkins Institute of Art, which converted many of the rooms for use as a school. Timothy was able to reclaim most of the furnishings, which is why we saw rooms such as the parlor with only wood benches to fill them. With so many empty rooms boasting double-height ceilings, the Institute was able to offer art classes with elaborate sets and plenty of space for painters and sculptors to let their imaginations run wild. Meanwhile, Edward went on a spending spree building stone castles and grand estates up and down New England, but perhaps that is a story for another time. Back in San Francisco, everything was going well. The Hopkins stood at the tallest point in San Francisco, allowing photographers to capture breathtaking panoramic pictures as the city developed. The entire community was growing exponentially with shops, restaurants, hotels, and attractions which made San Francisco a tourist destination for visitors from all around the world. Then, on the 18th of April 1906, the Great San Francisco earthquake violently shook the city. Houses and skyscrapers collapsed, leaving ruins in its wake. But for all the destruction, nothing was more devastating than the uncontrollable fires which ravaged the city over the following days. As the smoke cleared and people began exploring the streets, little was left. Once overlooking the city from its highest point, the Mark Hopkins mansion was nowhere to be found. Its wood-frame walls had turned to ash, with only its foundation blocks and a couple chimneys hinting that there was once a grand structure at the site. There are very few known photos of the interior, and perhaps this is all that will ever be found. But for now, we will just have to imagine how incredible the Mark Hopkins mansion must have been. In the 1880s, a colossal brownstone mansion known as the Vanderbilt Triple Palace rose along Manhattan's Fifth Avenue, a stretch famously nicknamed Millionaire's Row for its parade of Gilded Age mansions. This opulent residence belonged to William Henry Vanderbilt, at that time the richest man in America. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit the subscribe button and let's explore this house. William Henry Vanderbilt was born in 1821 as the eldest son of Commodore Vanderbilt, the shipping and railroad magnate who built one of the greatest fortunes of the 19th century. At 19, William married against his father's wishes, and the Commodore, finding his son frail and seemingly unambitious, banished him to manage a family farm on Staten Island in 1840. This turned out to be a blessing in disguise. To everyone's surprise, William transformed the neglected farm into a profitable enterprise. Impressed by these results, Commodore gradually entrusted him with bigger responsibilities. William's real proving ground came in the railroad business. In the 1860s, Commodore acquired the failing Long Island Railroad and put William in charge of revitalizing it. Once again, William exceeded expectations. He reorganized the line, returned it to profitability, and earned his father's respect. By the late 1860s, William had become a vice president of key Vanderbilt railroads, including the New York and Harlem and the Hudson River lines. He played a central role in the creation of the New York Central Railroad system, as the Commodore merged lines into a vast network spanning from New York to the Midwest. Under William's management, the Vanderbilt's railroad empire only grew. He aggressively expanded westward, acquiring lines like the Chicago and Northwestern and the Nickel Plate Railroad, and engaged in rate wars to outcompete rivals. By 1877, when the 83-year-old Commodore passed away, William inherited nearly $100 million. This inheritance instantly made him the richest man in America. In less than 9 years, he astonishingly doubled the Vanderbilt fortune to about $200 million. Armed with enormous wealth and determined to cement his family's social standing, William H. Vanderbilt set out to build a residence that would showcase his growing art collection and comfortably house his large family. The Vanderbilts were still considered new money by New York's old aristocracy, and some of William's younger relatives, notably his son William Kissam Vanderbilt and daughter-in-law Alva, were launching headlong into Gilded Age mansion building as a way to claim social prestige. William H. Vanderbilt's own plan would top them all, a magnificent Fifth Avenue mansion big enough to be called a triple palace. In January 1879, Vanderbilt purchased an expansive lot on Fifth Avenue between 51st and 52nd Streets, directly across from the then brand new St. Patrick's Cathedral. Here, Vanderbilt planned an unprecedented urban palace. Rather than a single house, the design called for 3 conjoined residences under one roof to accommodate multiple family members. This imposing structure, completed in 1882, came to be known as the Vanderbilt Triple Palace. It occupied the entire block front along Fifth Avenue, stretching 200 feet north-south and 150 feet deep, an immense footprint even by today's standards. John B. Snook was hired as the principal architect, with young designer Charles B. Atwood collaborating on the project. For the interiors and furnishings, Vanderbilt enlisted the famous Herter Brothers firm, one of the premier interior design houses of the era. Construction became a spectacle in its own right. Over 600 laborers worked on the mansion for a year and a half, including 60 skilled European sculptors brought over to carve stone ornaments for the facade and interior. The massing consisted of 2 connected sections. The southern section was a single-family home for William, his wife Maria, and their youngest children, while the northern section was divided into 2 separate homes for 2 of Vanderbilt's married daughters. Inside, Vanderbilt spared no expense in decoration and amenities. His private south residence boasted 58 rooms, each outfitted in different styles. The first floor alone was a showcase of Gilded Age luxury, a grand oak-paneled dining room for lavish dinner parties, a plush library, a formal parlor, and an immense drawing room for receptions. The drawing room was particularly splendid. It featured an ornate coffered ceiling adorned with a mural by French artist Pierre-Victor Galland, gilded moldings, and walls lined with silk and damask. Brilliant stained glass windows by John Lafarge filtered color light into the space, competing subtly with fixtures of crystal and gaslight. Lafarge's stained glass was a bold choice, as he was a rival of Louis Comfort Tiffany. Vanderbilt did patronize both, but chose Lafarge for this commission. Every chamber in the Vanderbilt house was furnished by Herter Brothers with custom-made pieces, carved mahogany cabinets, inlaid tables, silk-upholstered settees, each room reflecting a different period or theme, from French Renaissance to Asian-inspired, making the home almost a living museum of decorative arts. The most famous feature of William H. Vanderbilt's mansion was his private art gallery. Vanderbilt was an avid art collector who had acquired European Old Master paintings on a grand tour and through top dealers. To properly display these treasures, the mansion's design included a central 3-story art gallery with a soaring skylight. This top-lit gallery occupied the heart of the home and was so large that it could accommodate 207 oil paintings and watercolors, hung salon-style on its walls. In fact, Vanderbilt invited the public to view his art collection on Thursday afternoons by written invitation. For a time, throngs of New Yorkers, society figures, artists, and curious commoners filed through the Vanderbilt gallery in all of the Rembrandts and Raphaels on display. This ended after a few incidents of visitor misbehavior, prompting Vanderbilt to stop the public openings. Not all assessments of the Triple Palace were glowing, however. While the mansion certainly symbolized Gilded Age grandeur, many contemporary architecture critics panned its design. In 1881, critic Montgomery Schuyler derided the Triple Palace by saying, quote, "If these Vanderbilt houses are the result of entrusting architectural design to decorators, it is to be hoped the experiment may not be repeated." Yet the Triple Palace had its admirers too. Visitors stunned by its sheer magnificence and the treasures within often left glowing accounts. The Providence Journal in 1888 proclaimed it, quote, "beyond any question, the most superb house in New York." For 4 brief years, William H. Vanderbilt enjoyed the comforts of his Triple Palace and the stature it gave him. He hosted a housewarming ball in December 1883 with over 1,000 guests filling the mansion, a social triumph that marked the Vanderbilts' full arrival into high society. A week later, he held a reception for 3,000 invitees to celebrate the opening of his art gallery. By then, the Vanderbilts were not only richer than the old guard, but arguably more fashionable as well, thanks in part to such lavish displays. However, neither Vanderbilt's life nor his house would remain at their peak for long. William's reign as the wealthiest man in the country was destined to be short. In December 1885, less than 5 years after moving into his dream home, he passed away suddenly at the age of 64 following a stroke. In his will, he took care to provide generously for his family and for various charities. He left sizable bequests to his wife Maria and their 8 surviving children, as well as donations to institutions like the Met, several churches, hospitals, and the YMCA. Control of the Vanderbilt business empire passed to his eldest sons, Cornelius Vanderbilt II and William Kissam Vanderbilt, who would continue the family's railroad interest and famously build their own splendid mansions uptown in the years to follow. Meanwhile, what would become of William H. Vanderbilt's cherished Triple Palace? In his will, William stipulated special terms for the Fifth Avenue mansion and its contents. He granted his wife Maria Louisa a life interest in their portion of the home, meaning she could live there for the rest of her life. Ultimately, ownership of the property was to pass to their youngest son, George Washington Vanderbilt. To keep the estate intact, Vanderbilt's will forbade selling the house or even the art collection outside the family line. He clearly intended the Triple Palace to remain a Vanderbilt family seat for generations to come. His 2 daughters, Emily and Margaret, who already occupied the other units of the house, were bequeathed those portions outright, ensuring they had secure homes for their families. Though, Margaret was quick to sell her portion of the Triple Palace to her sister Emily. In 1896, a new chapter began. Maria Louisa Vanderbilt died, and as the will dictated, George W. Vanderbilt inherited the entire southern mansion at 640 Fifth Avenue. George, however, had little interest in moving into his father's house. By the turn of the century, taste had changed, and the Triple Palace's Victorian interiors were considered old-fashioned. Additionally, Millionaires' Row was gradually shifting from an exclusive residential enclave to a more commercial district, as clubs, shops, and hotels crept up from the south. George Vanderbilt had other plans for his life. He was pouring energy into the construction of Biltmore Estate. Compared to Biltmore's modern French Renaissance opulence, the dusty Triple Palace in New York did not entice him. For several years, the Triple Palace lingered in a sort of limbo, magnificent but underused, a white elephant of sorts for its heirs. Concerned about the encroachment of commerce around 51st Street, George Vanderbilt tried to keep the immediate neighborhood elite. In 1902, he commissioned the architects Hunt and Hunt to build a pair of elegant new limestone townhouses just west of the Triple Palace, which came to be known as the Marble Twins. The idea was to have wealthy friends or family occupy them, thus discouraging commercial development from moving in next door. Despite such efforts, George Vanderbilt clearly did not want to live in the old family mansion himself. Instead, he found an ideal caretaker for it: Henry Clay Frick, the Pittsburgh steel magnate and avid art collector. In 1905, Frick worked out a deal with George Vanderbilt to lease the entire 640 Fifth Avenue mansion on a 10-year rental. The arrangement was perfect. Frick got an immediate palace without having to build one, and George had the house occupied by someone who would lovingly maintain it, and crucially, not a commercial entity. Frick's sojourn in the Triple Palace had a lasting legacy. His experience living among Vanderbilt's galleries apparently inspired him to create his own permanent museum-quality mansion. After his lease ended, Frick built a magnificent marble residence further uptown on Fifth Avenue, now the famed Frick Collection Museum. Meanwhile, back at 51st Street, change was accelerating. In 1914, George W. Vanderbilt died unexpectedly, leaving behind his young daughter as his only heir. With George's passing, ownership of the Triple Palace followed William H. Vanderbilt's stipulation. It passed along the male line of the family. The next in line was Cornelius Vanderbilt III, William H.'s rebellious grandson. He promptly took possession in 1915 and asked Mr. Frick politely to vacate. Cornelius decided to modernize 640 Fifth Avenue for his own use, hiring architect Horace Trumbauer to remodel the interior and update the facade, while sharing the attached home with family. However, the clock was ticking for Millionaires' Row. By the 1920s, Midtown Manhattan was rapidly transforming. The block that once only heard the clip-clop of private carriages now buzzed with taxis, buses, and shoppers. One by one, the old families sold off or abandoned their Fifth Avenue mansions, which were then demolished to make way for commercial buildings. The Vanderbilt heirs were no exception. In 1926, Emily Vanderbilt Sloan decided to sell the northern part of the Triple Palace, perhaps motivated by the sky-high land values developers were offering. Using a team of lawyers to bypass William H.'s clause, that portion was sold. The two daughters' houses were swiftly demolished in 1927. On their footprint rose a tall commercial building, erasing 2/3 of the Triple Palace in one fell swoop. This left only the original Vanderbilt unit at 640 Fifth Avenue, still occupied by Cornelius III and family, standing next to new construction. For 2 decades, the last section of the Triple Palace hung on. Cornelius III passed away in 1942. Finally, the inevitable end came. In September 1947, demolition crews began tearing down 640 Fifth Avenue, closing the final curtain on Vanderbilt's Triple Palace. By March 1949, the once grand mansion was completely gone. In its place rose modern high-rise buildings that remain today. Thankfully, we have a handful of old photos and postcards to remember the Vanderbilt Triple Palace. We might think of celebrities as having perfect lives, but what goes on behind closed doors? Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we are exploring the home of renowned Gilded Age architect Stanford White, a beautiful setting for unspeakable crime. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. In 1853, Stanford White was born into a poor but well-respected family in New York City. His father Richard was a Shakespearean scholar, and even though he made very little money, he often found himself in the company of high society, entertaining them with his vast knowledge of the English playwright. The young Stanford would accompany his father to dinners, banquets, and balls, where he was able to forge connections with the emerging generation of New York's wealthy elite. Oftentimes, he would find himself in the company of notable contemporary artists such as Louis Comfort Tiffany and John Lafarge. The impressionable Stanford was inspired to no end by the creative genius of these artists and began sketching from a young age, quickly developing a taste for highly stylized architecture. By the age of 18, his hobby had turned into a passion. Without any formal education nor training in architecture, he was referred to the office of the most prominent architect of the time, Henry Hobson Richardson, where he apprenticed directly under the architect as his principal assistant. The more he learned from Richardson, the more questions he had. When he was 25 years old, he left for Europe to study ancient architecture. After a year and a half of sightseeing, sketching, and studying, he returned to New York City, ready to take the world by storm. He joined forces with 2 other rising architects, Charles McKim and William Mead, to create the highly celebrated architecture firm of McKim, Mead & White. Together, this trio became an unstoppable force as they climbed their way to the top, designing palaces and mansions for the country's most influential and wealthy barons of industry. Suddenly, anyone who was anyone wanted their mansion, institution, church, or hotel to be designed by the trio. The demand for their work was so high that if they accepted you as a client, it became instant bragging rights. By the late 1880s, Stanford White had designed the backdrop for life in the upper echelons to take place. If you were attending a ball at one of the country's most expensive estates, there was a good chance the house had been designed by Stanford White. But as time went on, Stanford wanted his own palace, a home where he could cherish his own work. In the 1890s, while he was working on Henry Taylor's Manhattan mansion, it came up in conversation that Mr. Taylor had a brownstone coming up for rent right next door to Stanford's apartment. It had been converted into a boarding house, but held a prime location on a corner lot facing Gramercy Park. One thing led to another, and Stanford was able to negotiate a fair lease, with the condition that he would be allowed to make any changes to the building as he saw fit. Taylor, being a huge fan of his work and a current client, gleefully agreed. In 1898, Stanford began reworking the interior, borrowing huge sums of money to renovate and decorate. While he made very few changes to the exterior, he did move the entrance of the house below street level, so the guests would arrive in the basement level entrance hall. You would then be directed to the reception room to wait for the Whites to welcome you to their home. After being greeted, you would make your way upstairs to arrive in the first floor stair hall, where Stanford had incorporated antique Spanish columns and centuries-old Italian and Flemish tapestries to decorate the walls. Facing the stairs, a floor-to-ceiling stone fireplace rises 12 feet, with stone cherubs framing intricate relief work on the upper mantel. To the right of the fireplace, towards the front of the house, the drawing room would be the first to dazzle you with its velvet walls rising below a gilded frieze. On the opposite wall, we will find the fireplace pronounced by Solomonic columns supporting a broken pediment. Stepping back, we can see the fireplace from the stair hall beyond the opening as we make our way towards the other end of the house. To get to the dining room, we will cut back across the stair hall, passing over antique Persian rugs. Just as Stanford had retrofitted old European rooms for his clients, He imported and reassembled a 16th century ceiling from a chapel in Florence. He went on to incorporate and repurpose several other 16th century Italian pieces, such as the fireplace, tapestries, and statues. In the corner of the room, he created an alcove using rounded windows in which he placed a 16th century Italian Renaissance fountain. In 1904, his wife, Bessie, hosted a midnight musicale where dinner guests dined at midnight while listening to live music from a Hungarian orchestra pouring in between the 16th century wood columns separating the adjoining music room. The music room was clad in painted wall panels with gold leaf accents. While trained professionals were allowed to play the instruments, no one else was allowed to touch them, as the collection was mostly made up of rare and antique instruments from all around the world. Towards the rear of the house, Stanford had adjoined and renovated the carriage house to include a skylit vestibule to double as a conservatory. He decorated the space with Delft tiles and repurposed marble balustrade. Heading up the stairs, we will find a studio and gallery located above the old carriage house. We enter the gallery through a grilled opening encased in a Renaissance-era door surround. To allow more light to illuminate Stanford's collection of royal portraits, the ceiling was raised with antique Flemish oak trusses to reinforce skylights. To the far end of the room, a Henry VII fireplace continued into the gable with knotted relief work. Now that Stanford White had the house of his dreams, it was time for him to enjoy it, or so he thought. As we continue his story, we will see more pictures of his house. Even though Stanford White had built a successful career, he was living far beyond his means. He was unable to afford to live such a lavish lifestyle and had borrowed money to make his dreams come true. All the while, he had not made a rent payment to Mr. Taylor in years, nor had he told his wife Bessie about any of his debt, which came as a surprise to her when he was murdered. On July 25, 1906, Stanford White was dining near the theater at the Second Madison Square Gardens, which he had designed. It was the opening night for the dinner show, Mademoiselle Champagne, and as the performer sang, "I Could Love a Million Girls," a man by the name of Harry Thaw approached Stanford White from behind and declared, "You've ruined my wife," and proceeded to fire 3 shots into Stanford, killing him instantly. When this happened, there was a lot of confusion, as Stanford White had been well respected and accepted by high society. Why would anyone want to kill him? In the court proceedings that followed, as Harry Thaw was put on trial, it came out that Stanford had been grooming Harry's fiancée, Evelyn Nesbit, from a young age. The details of Stanford's secretive and abusive past came into the spotlight as more underage accusers came forward. On YouTube, I can't go into the specifics, but instead, I will quote Mark Twain's reaction to the testimony. On the witness stand, in the hearing of a courtroom crowded with men, the girl told in the minutest detail the history of White's pursuit of her, even down to the particulars of his atrocious victory, a victory whose particulars might well be said to be unprintable. Knowing the cynical and oftentimes blatant approach Mark Twain penned on social issues, for him to use the term unprintable when describing the crimes of Stanford White against children, it speaks to the depths of disgust he elicited. Harry Thaw was charged with first-degree murder and held in jail without bond, where, because of his social status, he received 3-course catered meals and was allowed to wear his own tailored clothes. Eventually, the judge declared him insane and sentenced him to a very comfortable stay in prison. During this time, Harry became a feminist icon, being called a protector of women by several publications. In 1915, he was declared mentally competent by a judge and was released back into the public. Meanwhile, Stanford's widow Bessie was left to deal with the mess her husband had left for her. Stanford had left over $250,000 in debt for her to pay, the modern equivalent of over $8 million of debt. She held an estate auction where antiques and architectural elements were stripped from the home, which funded the repayment of only 1/10 of Stanford's debt. The house was then sold by Mr. Taylor to the Princeton Club, who stripped every room except for the gallery, which they left essentially untouched. It then went on to be used by the YWCA as the Young Women's Christian Association's International Institute, where several historically significant speeches and lectures were given. While it was looking like the house would last as a landmark in the city, Alexander Bing, a prominent developer, had been quietly buying up the block. In 1924, he purchased the building, evicted the YWCA, and had Stanford White's mansion torn down to make way for the Gramercy Park Hotel. At one time, it was the second largest house in the United States. Hi everyone, Ken here. Welcome to This House. Today we are exploring Shadowbrook. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. In 1838, Anson Phelps Stokes was born into a wealthy New York family. His father was an incredibly successful businessman who headed Phelps Dodge and Company, importing and exporting goods, as well as having extensive mining operations. But this was not new money. The family had long been wealthy and part of New York's high society, including being members of Mrs. Astor's 400 later on. When Anson was of age, he entered his father's company, eventually taking over the family business. He married Helen Phelps, the sole heir to her father's multi-million-dollar fortune, and the two moved into her Madison Avenue townhouse in New York City. They wasted no time starting a family of their own, having 9 children. But the city was no place for a bunch of active children to run about and play, so they purchased their first country house on Staten Island. A stately Second Empire-style mansion, which had been built in 1862. They made virtually no changes to the lavish interiors, which included a wood-paneled library with an extensive art collection, and half-height bookcases overflowing with novels for the children to enjoy. While the kids played with each other, Anson set sail on the water, yachting until sunset. Anson kept himself in shape, taking every opportunity he could to yacht, go on hunts, and play sports with his friends and kids. But as the years passed, the once sparsely populated countryside of Staten Island became crowded with new construction never ceasing. The area had all but lost its charm as a getaway from the hustle and bustle of city life. So Anson and Helen began searching for a new country house. They headed up to Massachusetts and began buying up land, starting with an old country home, which was simply named Homestead. Now that their children were starting to grow up, they needed a house to facilitate social functions such as courting. Homestead was perfect. It had over 40 rooms, including grand classically styled halls and massive ballroom with a minstrel gallery. But they quickly outgrew this mansion, and their now teenage children began to entertain their own friends. Only a few years after purchasing Homestead, Anson and Helen hired the architecture firm of McKim, Mead, and White to design for them what would become the second largest house to ever be built in the United States. Early on, Helen and Stanford White got into an argument and she fired him from the job site and brought in the little-known architect, H. Neil Wilson, to oversee the construction of the house. The 100-room mansion took a team of 500 workers nearly 2 years to complete. The sprawling Tudor Revival-style mansion boasted stucco walls broken up by timbers, with the stone accents being carved from rough cuts of marble below a brown-tiled roof. The expansive gardens were designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, who had worked on several large projects, including the planning of New York City Central Park. He included areas for the active family to play various sports and yard games, including tennis courts, stables, and even a dedicated field for croquet. Walking inside, the foyer was decorated with oversized furniture below timbered ceilings and set with ornate plasterwork and a large hearth to welcome you with warmth. The Pompeian Hall, as it was called, was clad in painted panels, both on the walls and the ceilings, with figures of humans and horses carved into the frieze, surrounding the room in its entirety. Here you would find the treasures the family had acquired from their trips abroad, including a tiger skin rug and potted exotic plants, paired with fine Chinese porcelains. The morning room continued this theme, with white walls and ceilings, as well as intricate fretwork dividing one corner of the room from a tower. This room was decorated with floral prints on all the furniture and textiles, and the walls were wainscoted with pilasters reaching towards the frieze, from which plaster garland elegantly draped over silk wallpaper. The main focal point of the parlor was the Gothic fireplace, with blown-out proportions offering spiraling vines worked into its upper mantle's relief work. Fluted Ionic columns were used not just as decoration in this house, but also for much-needed support of the expansive ceilings. The library offered a more rustic approach to decor, with unpainted millwork crafted into Gothic arches and paired with the rough texture of bricks on the fireplace. Diamond-paned windows were set below stained glass, adding to the ambiance provided by the English antiques which filled the room. Though the house had 3 dining rooms, this one was the largest. The exposed ceiling beams were supported by large corbels evenly spaced to line up with the pattern of the wallpaper over half-height board and batten wall panels. To give you an idea of just how large this room was, the rug was said to measure 30 feet by 48 feet. While guests certainly had enough space to spread out, no house of this magnitude would be complete without a ballroom. Its rich wood panels were carved by master woodworkers to feature seamless transitions between each panel. The ceiling was truly unique to Shadowbrook, with a dizzying array of geometry, built in layers and lit by electric lights in its medallions. The house continued on, with artisan millwork found at every nook and cranny. The second floor was reserved for guests, with over 20 guest suites, and the third floor was set aside for the family, with each of the 9 children's bedrooms boasting their own private bathrooms, something which was rare for the time period, regardless of social class. Now that the house was finished, the Stokes could entertain as often as they liked, hosting huge parties for Christmas and New Year's. They offered their younger guests sleigh rides, while the men competitively ice fished in the frozen ponds. But Anson and Helen's paradise did not last long. In the summer of 1899, Anson was riding his horse around the property, one of his favorite activities, when something spooked the horse out in the woods. He threw Anson from his saddle, which sent Anson crashing into trees. His leg was so badly mangled that it had to be amputated shortly after. With Anson unable to enjoy playing golf, riding horses, or any other sports for that matter, he and Helen decided to place the house up for rent and move back to the city. Shadowbrook was leased out for a few years before being purchased by Henry W. Merrill, who used the estate as a hotel, with 100 guest suites scattered about its upper floors. The hotel flopped, so after being open for only 2 years, Merrill sold Shadowbrook to Spencer Schotter, who enjoyed the house until 1909, when he was tried for violating antitrust laws. He ended up winning his case, but in doing so, he had spent nearly his entire fortune on his legal defense. In desperate need of money, Spencer leased Shadowbrook to Maggie Vanderbilt for $15,000 per month, or the modern-day equivalent of about $442,000 per month. Meanwhile, U.S. steel magnate Andrew Carnegie's health was failing. His doctor had advised him not to travel to his beloved castle in Scotland, but rather to stay near the city, up in the mountains where he could get fresh air. That's when he decided to rent the brick house, which Anson and Helen had built in Fairfield County, Connecticut when they left Shadowbrook. It was a grand estate with perfectly manicured gardens. Inside, grand halls were classically styled, leading to large rooms finished out with wood-paneled walls. When Carnegie's daughter came to visit him here, she mentioned that the same family who had built this house had also built a beautiful home remotely situated in the Berkshires. Carnegie decided to look further into this dreamy property which his daughter had described. He found that Spencer Schotter no longer owned the property, even though he was collecting rent on it. In fact, the bank had foreclosed on him. So Carnegie purchased Shadowbrook from the bank and moved in to spend his final seasons in one of the nation's largest homes. He lived here comfortably until his passing in 1919, when his widow put the house up for sale. She sold it for a bargain price to the Jesuits of the province of New England, who used it as a seminary until 1956, when the house spontaneously exploded. Upon investigating the tragedy, it was found that the large reserves of oil stored in barrels had caught fire when a broiler malfunctioned. The explosion and following inferno left the house in ruins, taking 5 lives with it, with no practical way of restoring or rebuilding Shadowbrook. So it was lost forever. Of the Stokes family's other homes, the brick house went on to be used by their politically active adult children as a meeting place for the Communist Party of America, before it was gifted to the Convent of the Sacred Heart to be used as an all-girls school. Tragically, when the school shut down in 1966, most of the house was demolished, with only 2 of its wings being reconfigured into single-family houses. Homestead ended up catching fire the same year the Stokes moved out of Shadowbrook. Because the house was all wood construction, the only thing remaining after the blaze were the brick chimneys. The rest was a total loss. On Staten Island, when the Stokes moved out, Anson had developed a handful of houses on the property's grounds to create a small neighborhood. He sold the main house to another member of Mrs. Astor's 400, John G. Wendell, who let the house fall into a state of disrepair. By 1928, John had abandoned the property and it was torn down out of concern for public safety. But thankfully, one of their homes did survive. Their townhouse at Madison and 37th in Manhattan went on to become the Morgan Library, with much of its facade remaining intact. In Manhattan, where every square inch of real estate is a prized luxury, there once sat a 25-acre estate daring to defy the concrete jungle. Hi everyone, Ken here. Welcome to this house. In 1861, C.K.G. Billings was born into a prominent New York family. His father relocated the family to Chicago after accepting the position of president at the People's Gaslight and Coke Company. Running a near monopoly on utilities in one of the world's largest cities was incredibly lucrative, so it was no surprise that when CKG graduated from college, his father opened the company door for him. In 1887, as his father retired, CKG took his place as president. When he took control of the company, he aggressively acquired the other 12 smaller energy companies servicing the greater Chicago area and merged them into his company. At this point, in 1901, the company profits were at a record high, and CKG decided to cash in. Retiring as president while holding a controlling interest in the company, he chose to take a seat on the board so he could sit back and collect cash with ease. Now retired at the age of 40, CKG was able to pursue his hobbies. He had long been an avid sportsman and had helped to found various athletic clubs. He could now focus all of his time on sports, especially trotting, in which he had won several trophies and ribbons. Being an outdoorsman, he began searching for an equestrian property, and to his family's surprise, he thought Manhattan would be the perfect place to move to. At this time, Manhattan wasn't exactly known for its rolling pastures and nature trails. It was the metropolitan heart of America's largest city, a place where the wealthiest barons of industry spent unimaginable sums of money to build mansions with shared walls and no yards. He purchased a city mansion, blending in with high society. Then, he purchased 25 undevelopable acres along the Hudson River in Washington Heights. The site, which was formerly Fort Tryon, consisted of steep, choppy cliffs 250 feet above sea level, one of the highest points on the island. CKG then hired architect Guy Lowell and landscape architect Charles Downing Lay to design for him a grand equestrian estate. After 2 long years of regrading the terrain and slow, tedious construction, the first phase of the estate was complete. In 1903, the 25,000 square foot stable complex was finished. Sources vary on the exact number, but most agree that there were between 60 and 75 stalls for horses inside. There were also a few bedrooms and a large casino where CKG could entertain his friends. To celebrate this monumental achievement, he sent out invitations to a dinner party. It was leaked to the press that guests would be required to sit on hobby horses all night, and that the entire dinner would become quite the spectacle. As journalists began gathering outside of the front gate, CKG had his party relocated to Sherry's restaurant in town. The restaurant's 4th floor ballroom was filled with hay, and all 36 guests were required to remain seated atop rented horses while dinner was served. News quickly spread about Manhattan's newest, most eccentric millionaire, but CKG was just getting started. While the architects were busy overseeing the next phase of his estate, CKG commissioned the Vanadis, a 232-foot steam yacht, to keep docked in the Hudson at the foot of his property. Finally, after 5 long years of construction, the cliff had been transformed into a gentle hill, and sitting atop it in the center was a fortress constructed from solid granite blocks. The 25,000 square foot mansion had been designed in the Chateauesque style and faced in limestone. As we rotate about the mansion, we will notice a tower rising 80 feet into the air. The views from the top were said to be unobstructed, and while it was far from the tallest building, it rivaled the tallest skyscrapers of the time in height above sea level. The driveway alone took more than 100 men a full year to construct, carving out the granite cliffs and reusing the stone to build retaining walls, including the grand arcade which was dubbed the Roman roadway. Inside, the entire mansion was planned for entertainment, with the fountain room echoing the owner's eccentricities. While waiting for CKG to show us around, we would first take a seat in the reception room, where a full-time musician would play only the current hits on the piano. Next, we will make our way into the living room, clad in rich wood paneling. As we look around, we will find antiques from dozens of countries, and at this point, we might start to believe that CKG is sophisticated, unlike the words we've read about him in the newspapers. But then we hear him hollering for us as he splashes around in the indoor pool, discarding the rigid social standards of the time. As we hear pins crashing in the bowling alley, we start to realize that Tryon Hall is perhaps the most lavish man cave in existence. Though, not all of the rooms could be so fun. Mrs. Billings ensured that the mansion had a proper dining room for formal dinners. Though, the breakfast room, offering panoramic views of New York from the tower, was where CKG chose to bring most of his friends for shared meals. Mrs. Billings, who had the same dining set reproduced, chose to eat her informal meals in the conservatory. While we're here, we can peek our heads outside to see the swimming pool carved into the bluff itself and overflowing with water into the terrace gardens below. There are no known photos of the stair hall, so let's resume our tour from the second floor stair landing, which has been staged as the library. From here we can make our way into the billiards room, where CKG's trotting trophies are on full display. Nearby, we will find the Billings bedroom, where, as was customary for the time, they each had their own separate beds. Tryon Hall became the center of New York's social scene amongst the athletic men of high society. What was meant to be a family mansion quickly turned into a boys' club, with Mrs. Billings choosing to spend much of her time at their other properties. By 1917, CKG had had his fun and grew bored of the property. He purchased a 21-room apartment in town and set out to build multiple estates all around the country, but that's a story for another time. Meanwhile, John D. Rockefeller Jr. was building his legacy and was enticed by the opportunity to purchase Tryon Hall. Not only did he buy the Billings mansion, he purchased 2 adjoining estates and merged the land together in the hopes of founding a park. Unfortunately, John Jr. did not have the pull he thought he did in the city, and it was nearly impossible to get the local government on board with the creation of a new park. Nevertheless, he held on to the properties, renting out the house to an acquaintance while he waited for a decision from the city. After 9 years had passed, and while his tenant was still renting the mansion, it caught on fire. According to the various newspapers of the time, this disaster was of epic proportions. Not only were the hydrants too far away from the house, but the hoses were not long enough to get within 50 feet of its walls. Firemen had to race down to the river to fetch water in tanks and bring it all the way up the drive. And while the tenants escaped unharmed, there were reports of a dog trapped in the tower. According to the Times, the dog leapt from the second floor into the flower bed, and while it was scared, it survived uninjured. Just after that, the tower collapsed in on itself, causing a pillar of fire to rocket into the sky, which could be seen from miles away. By the next morning, though the fire was under control, the mansion and everything inside of it had been reduced to ash. Among the most grieved incinerated items were 2 paintings by Rembrandt, a handful of European tapestries, and the plans to one day turn the house into a New York history museum. By the following year, Rockefeller had cleaned up the mess and reorganized the grounds with the aid of Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. Finally, with a finished park, the city was ready to accept Rockefeller's donation. While the mansion no longer exists, you can still find bits and pieces of the estate scattered about Fort Tryon Park, blending into the scenery, reminders of what came before. What happens when wealth, power, and tragedy collide in a New York City mansion? Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we are exploring the Barney Mansion in Manhattan. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. In 1851, Charles Barney was born the son of Asheville Barney, a successful Cleveland commission merchant. As his father's business grew, the family relocated to New York City, where Asheville eventually became the president of Wells Fargo and Company. Fitting for a bank president, Asheville built an imposing brownstone palace at the corner of Park and 38th. Meanwhile, his son Charles attended Williams College, where he began courting Lily Whitney, of the powerful and influential Whitney family, which we have covered in several previous videos. Between the connections afforded to Charles by his father's prominence in the banking industry and his ties to the Whitney family, his success in life was guaranteed. After graduating, he returned to New York City, married Lily, and became a stockbroker at Rogers & Gould. By 1884, he had climbed the ladder to become the vice president of the Knickerbocker Trust Company, where he was eventually named president. He made waves in the banking world as he increased deposits at Knickerbocker's 6-fold, earning it the title of the 3rd largest bank in New York. All the while, his father had passed away and handed down the family mansion to him. In the 1880s, Charles hired the prominent architecture firm of McKim, Mead & White to completely rework the interior of the brownstone palace. Upon entering the home, you would arrive in the stair hall, where every surface had been faced with marble, save the gilded coffered ceiling. Turning to the side, we can peer through one of the ornately decorated archways to view the dining room, directly facing a floor-to-ceiling fireplace decorated with busts on its lower mantel and intricate relief work on its upper mantel framed by stone maidens. To the other side of the dining room, an alcove was separated by box columns, complete with Corinthian capitals as vines creep down from the mirrored coffered ceiling, allowing more light to reflect into the massive room. Looking back towards the stair hall from the dining room, we can see that the walls are covered in antique European tapestries below an elaborate frieze with murals depicting scenes from antiquity. Coming from the stair hall, we can peel back the tapestry, making our way through the portal to arrive in the living room. From the architect's notes, the walls were finished out with antique Venetian velvet below a gold leaf coffered ceiling framing frescoes. You would have been brought through the living room to await the Barneys in the reception room, which was finished out with a complex assembly of overlapping geometric and floral patterns below a gold leaf coffered ceiling. If you had still not been impressed by the house, the gold room would be sure to dazzle you. Every single architectural element and ornament had been gold leaf from the walls to the ceiling to the fireplace's mantel. Upstairs we will find the library, with half-height bookshelves skirting the room. In the center, a stone fireplace rose below a matching stone cornice, and on the ceiling, a gilded frame contained a dramatic and highly detailed mural. Charles would start his morning in his bedroom, having breakfast in front of the fireplace. He was known not to dress until midday, only heading into the office after lunchtime. The Barneys seemed to have the perfect life. They were well respected in their social circles and were well respected by the public for their contributions to the arts and to the zoo, but nothing could prepare them for what was about to happen. On October 15, 1907, Charles partnered Knickerbocker with speculators in an effort to control the United Copper Company by cornering the market. This plan, if successful, would have created new copper barons in each investor in a single day. But something did not go as planned. The timing was off, and the plan backfired as the United Copper Company saw its stock value plummet. This caused several banks, including Knickerbocker, to lose a lot of money. Investors began pulling funding, and Charles was pressured to tender his resignation. Within days, as news spread, a bank run was triggered as people withdrew their entire life savings, which caused Knickerbocker to fail. This led to the subsequent panic of 1907, in which the New York Stock Exchange fell over 50%. Thankfully, Charles was well diversified and was able to escape the panic with about $2.5 million left over, the modern equivalent of over $80 million. Even though he was fine financially, his poorly timed actions had caused thousands of people to lose their livelihoods. After a month had passed by, he was still unable to shake his intense feelings of guilt and shame. On November 14th, Charles woke up like any other day, choosing to have breakfast in his bedroom before shooting himself in the stomach. From various accounts, it seems that he had aimed for and missed his heart. He survived, with his wife rushing to his side, followed by a team of lawyers who had him sign any and every imaginable estate planning form in case he should pass away from the injuries. Later that afternoon, the doctors arrive and prep for surgery in Charles' bedroom in an attempt to remove the bullet. The pain was too much for Charles to handle as the doctor began exploratory surgery, so he was placed under anesthesia, which, at the time, was an incredibly risky and still experimental act from which he never woke up. His house was passed down to his son and ended up catching on fire. Faced with costly repairs and a limited budget, his son sold the brownstone palace to developers who tore it down and replaced it with an apartment building. Of the many mansions that have been built in the United States, perhaps none boasted as much flair as those of William A. Clark. Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we are exploring two mansions in a double feature as we head to Manhattan to uncover Clark's folly and venture out west to Montana to explore the Copper King's mansion. Hit that like button to let YouTube know you appreciate historic homes, and let's begin exploring this house. William A. Clark was born on January 8, 1839 in a log cabin in Connellsville, Pennsylvania, marking the humble beginnings of a man who would become a titan of America's Gilded Age. In 1856, Clark and his family moved to Iowa, where he taught school and studied law. This period of relative calm preceded a bold venture west in 1863, where Clark sought fortune in the goldfields of Montana during the peak of the gold rush. It was here that Clark initially engaged in placer mining, panning streams for little bits of copper, but quickly he diversified his interest. Recognizing the limitations of placer mining earnings, he ventured into trading and banking, lending money to mining companies. When the companies could not afford the steep interest, he would foreclose on them and seize their mining operations. This practice allowed him to amass a considerable fortune as he quickly became one of the largest mining magnates in the US, earning him a place among the famed Copper Kings of Butte, Montana. Clark's pursuits were not confined to mining. He also invested in electric power companies, newspapers, and railroads, including the significant San Pedro, Los Angeles, and Salt Lake Railroad, which would play a pivotal role in the development of the namesake Clark County, Nevada, in the Las Vegas Valley. By the 1880s, his net worth had skyrocketed, and while he had built several homes over the years, he was finally ready to settle down and build his first mansion. He purchased a prime lot along Butte, Montana's Granite Street and hired architect D.T. McDevitt to design for him a 34-room mansion. The towering residence quickly became the envy of Butte, finished out in red brick with copper accents, fitting for the Copper King. Construction lasted for 4 years as artists added finishing touches, leaving no surface unadorned. When it was completed in 1888, the grand total amounted to a Montana record-breaking $260,000, the modern equivalent of over $8.5 million. As we venture throughout the rooms, pay close attention to frescoed ceilings, intricate woodwork, and stained glass windows shimmering in the background. Despite his business successes, Clark's ambitions stretched into the political arena. He served as president at both the Montana state constitutional conventions and yearned for national political influence. His first attempt to become a U.S. Senator in 1899 was marred by scandal when it was revealed that he had bribed members of the Montana state legislature. This scandal, although it prevented him from taking a Senate seat at the time, highlighted the endemic corruption of the era and contributed to the passage of the 17th Amendment, which mandated the direct election of senators. Undeterred by setbacks, Clark returned to the political fray and successfully secured a Senate seat in 1901, where he served until 1907. His tenure in politics was characterized by a blend of progress and controversy, with his business interest often guiding his legislative priorities. After the short stint in politics, Clark decided to focus his attention back on his businesses, leaving Montana for New York. He purchased one of the most desirable lots in Manhattan at the corner of 5th Avenue and 77th Street, and began planning not just a mansion, but a palatial residence to show off the true scope of his wealth. Started in 1897, Clark flew through architects as none of them could deliver the grand residence he imagined he should have. Finally, he hired the architecture firm of Lord Hewlett & Hull, who delivered plans for a 9-story tall 121-room mansion. Construction of such a grand residence required Clark to purchase quarries and construct railroad lines just to transport stone for artists to carve on site. Furthermore, an underground railroad line was designed to travel beneath New York streets to deliver coal directly to the mansion. As his house began to take shape, temporary structures were built along the facade to shield artists from the elements as they carved delicate features into the marble and granite structure. After 14 long years of construction, in 1911, the William A. Clark House in Manhattan was completed. While the Beaux-Arts style had been incredibly popular among the ultra-wealthy, Clark's house was an exception, with critics calling it an amalgamation of misproportioned architectural elements, leading it to gain the nickname Clark's Folly. Entering the mansion from street level, we arrive in the vestibule within full view of the grand staircase straight ahead. The marble newel posts to either side of us were originally furnished with bronze statues, and while they no longer appear in the photo from the vestibule, we can imagine them flanking the entryway as we begin our tour. The entire stair hall has been clad in marble from floor to ceiling. Before we ascend the staircase, we'll explore the first floor's many opulent rooms. Arriving as guests, we're escorted to the reception room to await the announcement that our host is ready to see us. From here we might be led into the library, clad in oak imported from England's Sherwood Forest. Though this room commands highly coveted views of Central Park, stained glass windows demand our attention. On our way out, we can pause to admire the intricate relief work found on the fireplace's mantel and appreciate the overshadowed artisan details of the built-in oak bookcases. Across the hall from the library, we find Mr. Clark's private office and can imagine other titans of industry stopping by for brief meetings as they discuss joint railroad ventures. Continuing along the mansion's 5th Avenue facing front, we find the billiard and smoking room, blending the finishes from the stair hall and libraries. One of the main reasons Clark wanted a house so large was to be able to store his growing art collection, behind which we find Gothic tracery in the wainscoting with a floor-to-ceiling fireplace mantel continuing this intricate motif. On the opposite end of the mansion, we'll explore the Fans Gallery, housing Clark's collection of English earthenware and colored glass. While most of Manhattan's mansions contained a butler's pantry for families to display their fine china, the architects followed Clark's instructions to lend the room a quality more akin to a museum than a pantry. Let's return to the grand staircase and follow the gilded, wrought iron balustrade as it sweeps from the second floor. Directly across from the stair landing, and looking out over the entrance of the mansion, we find the petit salon with herringbone floors, gilded wall panels, and intricate murals rounding towards the ceiling. Continuing through the door at the end of the petit salon brings us to the Salon Doré. Originally built in the 1700s, this room was purchased from l'Hôtel de Clermont in Paris. After being carefully disassembled and shipped to the United States, it was reassembled in its entirety. In fact, architectural salvage from all over Europe was installed throughout the mansion. On the opposite side of the petit salon, we find the morning room, clad in 170 uniquely carved wood panels. Passing through the sculpture hall with 30-foot high ceilings brings us to the dining room, where a 15-foot wide Numidian marble fireplace boasts life-size sculptures of the Roman gods Neptune and Diana freeing themselves from the upper mantle. Next we find the picture gallery, where Clark stored tens of millions of dollars worth of fine art. The gallery stretched 95 feet long below a leaded skylight soaring 2 stories overhead, ensuring that his art collection was well lit by natural light. At one end of the gallery sat the Harris organ, the largest chamber organ in North America. When the mansion was completed in 1911, it boasted not only everything we've seen, but also state-of-the-art laundry facilities, an indoor pool, and dozens of rooms for live-in staff. All total, construction cost a whopping $7 million, the modern-day equivalent of over $230 million when adjusting for inflation alone. After Clark passed away in 1925, his family sold the Manhattan mansion for less than half of what it cost to build. It was purchased by a developer, and after only 19 years of standing on the corner of 5th and 77th, it was demolished to make way for this apartment building, which continues to stand to this day. While not nearly as palatial by comparison, but nonetheless grand in its own right, the Copper King Mansion in Montana continues to stand to this day. When we think about fleeting beauty, we imagine aging, but some beautiful things have just one spectacular moment in time before they are gone forever. Hi everyone, Ken here. Welcome to This House. Today we are exploring one of my favorite Gilded Age mansions and its brief moment of beauty. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. William Solomon had worked his way up in the railroad industry, becoming the chairman of the board of directors for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. All the while, he had been eyeing an abandoned house which sat at the corner of 5th Avenue and 83rd Street. He purchased it along with a neighboring house to have them torn down so he could build his dream house on Millionaire's Row. As construction began in 1901, William quit his job to found William Solomon and Company, an international bank which he would spend several years abroad setting up while his house was finished. In 1906, he returned to his completed mansion, rising taller than Frederick W. Vanderbilt's house next door. The limestone facade was punctuated by a multi-story bay window and accented by pronounced limestone window surrounds. Coins along the house's corners led the eyes up to a stone frieze below a stone balustrade. The house was refined and fitting of the neighborhood. Pleased with the curb appeal, William entered the house to find the art and antiques he had collected in Europe had been used to masterfully decorate every room of the house. The stair hall featured an oversized marble staircase, of which the marble balustrade swept alongside, twisting at the base, acting as pedestals for marble cherubim. The ceiling below the second-floor balcony was coffered in an intricate geometric pattern, below which sat Louis XIV furniture nestled against the ornately carved stone walls. Tapestries decorated the walls above the stairs and surrounding the second-floor stair landing. The stair hall was capped off by a glass dome with masterfully crafted ironwork whimsically strewn in a floral pattern. Set opposite from the stairs, on the first floor, was the sitting room. Entering between curtains, you would see Louis XIV furniture set about the room conversationally. The wall panels were set between gilded pilasters, with some concealing hidden French doors that blended into the wood paneling. Each wall contained at least one gilded mirror, reflecting natural light around the room as we see no chandeliers were present. Continuing through the house, you would encounter many elaborately carved doors, some with balconies overhead and some with transom windows. No surface was left without ornamentation. The dining room boasted a larger-than-life stone fireplace, intricately carved with statuary adorning its upper mantel and relief work carved into its hood. The coffered ceilings were maze-like in appearance, set in a complex geometric pattern. Below the frieze and between the baseboards, tapestries decorated the expanse of the walls, with the only interruptions being called out in the form of architectural elements. The conservatory boasted barrel-vaulted ceilings, terminating in a half-dome set above the bay window, which was delineated by a carved arch set above marble columns. Plants could be found growing on tables and on marble shelves, which had been installed as permanent fixtures to the house. The library contained half-height bookcases, set below damask wallpaper, with a solid limestone fireplace extending from the floor to the frieze. It was carved with figures flanking the upper mantel, with a scene from antiquity carved in the center. The ceiling rounded out above the frieze, to frame a ceiling mural set above the space. The bedrooms were equally as ornate, with many of them containing their own sitting rooms, such as this one with white wall panels and light-colored furniture joined to a similar room decorated with chairs and a desk. In stark contrast, another bedroom was clad in wood paneling with a corner fireplace set between two windows. The mirror above the fireplace was created in the same proportions of the windows, almost creating the illusion of a third central window. The furniture was heavy, with floral patterned textiles draping down along the walls. Like the last bedroom, this one contained a sitting room, though it was set up as a study, with floor-to-ceiling bookcases inset between wood pilasters. The house contained several more bedrooms, as well as many other rooms, the purposes of which might have been lost to time. Here we can see another corner fireplace with an intricately carved stone upper mantel set between ornate wood panels. This room appears to have built-in seating along the walls with a large table in the center. If anyone knows what the purpose of this room was, I would be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments. Many of the ornate features of this home might remain a mystery, as there are a finite number of newspaper clippings and photos. William did not live here long, as he passed away in 1919. His heirs emptied the home in an auction that made national headlines. In an attempt to sell the house, one of the heirs offered the home at auction, but not a single person made a bid for any price. Several years went by, and though the home had been emptied of all of its furnishings, all of the architectural elements, columns, fireplaces, wood panelings, and stone carvings remained inside. A developer purchased the home, and with everything still intact, he demolished it, destroying all of the hard work the artisans had spent decorating the house. The once intricate reliefs were reduced to rubble, and a 13-story building was erected in its place. Though the mansion is gone, we still have a handful of photos to commemorate the work of the master artisans who created this spectacular palace. The man known as the father of the new Navy helped the U.S. to establish itself as a military superpower and became incredibly wealthy in doing so. Hi everyone, Ken here. Welcome to This House. Today we are exploring the Whitney Mansion in Manhattan. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. William Whitney grew up in a well-to-do family, so it was no surprise that when he attended college at Yale, he became a member of the Skull and Bone Society, which connected him with some of the world's most influential elites, including his future brother-in-law, Colonel Oliver Payne. After graduating, he practiced law, helping to weed out fraud in New York City's government. Around this time, he married his good friend, Colonel Payne's sister, Flora, and Colonel Payne gifted the newlywed couple a mansion in Manhattan. Later on, during the Cleveland presidency, it was rumored that Colonel Payne bribed officials so that his dear brother-in-law could become the United States Secretary of the Navy. While in this position, William greatly expanded the Navy by ordering new fleets of ships, helping to bring the Navy into the cutting edge of the 20th century. Because of this overhaul of the Navy's infrastructure, he is often referred to as the father of the new Navy. He awarded manufacturing contracts to his friends and family members, including his brother Henry, who was president of the Metropolitan Steamship Company. There are several unproved rumors surrounding how William became wealthy serving in this position, and we won't go into those. But by the end of his term, he had amassed a $40 million fortune, being worth the modern-day equivalent of $1.3 billion. Now, being incredibly wealthy, he began to search for love, even though he was already married to his first wife. But William had no regard for his allegiances. He began partying with J.P. Morgan aboard his private yacht, where he met Edith Randolph, Morgan's mistress. William and Edith quickly fell in love. Then his wife Flora mysteriously died from an illness. William was said to not be heartbroken, but instead excited to be able to bring Edith into his life publicly. But Colonel Payne issued William a strong threat that if he did not take the 2 years of customary mourning time to grieve his late sister, that there would be consequences for his actions. So William obliged, and waited a couple years to go public with his relationship, marrying Edith. The two began to start their lives together, searching for a perfect house in Manhattan to start their own family. That's when they found the Stewart Mansion at 871 Fifth Avenue. The second Empire-style mansion had been built 13 years earlier and was now considered out of style. While it had large rooms, they had been decorated by the previous generation and were lacking the glitz and glam associated with the Gilded Age. But there was something about the house they liked. Its proportions were nice, and it had good bones on a corner lot at one of the world's most desirable intersections. Instead of tearing it down to start over, they hired the architecture firm of McKim, Mead, and White to reimagine the house in a more palatial style. At the direction of Stanford White, the walls were ripped down to the studs, and several rooms were greatly expanded, with a few new additions being added to the house. He began sourcing antique fireplaces, wood panels, and other architectural elements to be shipped in from Europe, while McKim and Mead reworked the facade into a limestone-clad Beaux-Arts palace. When it was all said and done, in 1902, the mansion now boasted 54,000 square feet of interior living space, with the cost of renovations reaching the staggering amount of $3.5 million, or the modern-day equivalent of about $121 million. The entrance to the house had been moved to 68th Street, where a pair of bronze and wrought iron gates, which had been reclaimed from the Doria Palace in Italy, greeted visitors. Passing through the front doors, you would arrive in the entrance hall, where coffered ceilings towered above a solid marble fireplace with intricate relief work in its upper mantel. To the side, marble stairs, complemented by carved marble balustrade, swept along marble block walls decorated with antique tapestries. As you made your way through the entrance hall, you would see rare trophies strewn about the mosaic stone floor, with potted exotic plants contrasting against the white marble halls. Before exploring the rest of the house, you would be guided to the Louis XV reception room beyond velvet curtains. The room boasted antique wall panels with a subtle but elegant plaster vine draping the ceiling. As you continued through the house, the rooms became more and more grand, with the drawing room boasting intricately carved window surrounds set against wallpaper below a coffered ceiling. The library continued with half-height bookcases set against imported, antique panels, draped with embroidered crimson-colored velvet ducal banners below the ceiling's ornate millwork. Entering the dining room was like opening a book from antiquity. The tapestries displayed on the walls depicted scenes from the Iliad and were broken up by marble door surrounds which had been salvaged from ancient Roman temples. And if none of these rooms had impressed you so far, the ballroom, which was now the largest in New York City, would leave you speechless. It had been finished out in the Louis XIV style and could sit 200 guests for grand banquets. In fact, before the house had been completely finished, the first ball of the new millennia was hosted here. Of the many notable guests, Carolyn Astor stole the spotlight when she wore an outfit that was said to be adorned with more diamonds than the rest of the guests owned. Perhaps an exaggeration, but a detail nonetheless that helps paint a picture of just how grand this ball was. Unfortunately, before the house was finished and before this ball was hosted, Edith fell off her horse, paralyzing her from the neck down. She passed away shortly after. Nevertheless, William enjoyed the mansion, mingling with high society and hosting some of the most lavish parties the city had ever seen. Until 1904, just 2 years after the mansion had been completed, his appendix ruptured. After having it removed, he was found dead on the marble floors, possibly having taken a fall while still recovering. Within a few months, his heirs had finished auctioning off the house and all of its contents to a single buyer, James Henry Smith. He moved in immediately and began hosting huge parties, filling the halls with music and cheer once again. But enjoyment never lasted long in the Whitney mansion. Less than 3 years after buying the house, James married his lover, Annie Armstrong. The newlywed couple set out to Japan on their honeymoon, where James ended up passing away. William Whitney's son, Harry Payne Whitney, then ended up buying the mansion for himself and his wife, Gertrude Vanderbilt, to live in. After Harry passed away in 1930, Gertrude spent less and less time at the mansion, preferring to live at their country house known as the Manse instead. In 1942, she decided to place the house up for sale, but she passed away before it sold. Her heirs auctioned off the house and all of its contents. At this time, New York was rapidly developing, with mansions being replaced by skyscrapers at an alarming rate. Knowing that whoever would buy the mansion would probably tear it down, the heirs had the foresight to auction off most of the architectural elements, antique wall panels, and elaborate fireplaces. In hindsight, this was a great decision, as the developer who purchased the house had it bulldozed without removing the remaining architectural salvage. In its place, the apartment block at 870 Fifth Avenue was erected, replacing what was the site of one of Manhattan's most lavish mansions. Though the house has been lost to progress, we have these photos to remember it by. Before the great 1906 San Francisco earthquake wiped out the city, there was one mansion sitting atop Nob Hill of unparalleled craftsmanship. Hi everyone, Ken here. Today we are traveling back in time to uncover the lavish interiors of the Leland Stanford mansion. Make sure to hit that like button if you want to see more deep dives on Nob Hill's lost mansions. Born in 1824 to a New York family, Leland Stanford's early life laid the foundation for his later achievements. His initial foray into the professional world began after studying law and being admitted to the bar in 1848. The allure of opportunity then drew him westward to California during the gold rush, a move that would mark the beginning of his substantial impact on the American West. In California, Stanford's entrepreneurial spirit flourished. Initially engaging in mercantile pursuits, he quickly adapted to the needs of a rapidly growing state. His ability to identify and seize business opportunities was evident in his ventures, which ranged from retailing to wholesale trading. However, it was his involvement in the railroads that truly cemented his wealth and influence. As one of the Big Four, alongside Charles Crocker, Mark Hopkins, and Collis B. Huntington, Stanford played a pivotal role in the development of the Central Pacific Railroad. This monumental project not only linked the Atlantic and Pacific coast, but also transformed the economic landscapes of the United States. Between his railroads, insurance companies, and a stint as governor, Stanford amassed one of the largest fortunes California had ever seen. In the early 1870s, he and the rest of the Big Four relocated from Sacramento to San Francisco, each of them building monumental mansions high above the city on Nob Hill. In 1875, Stanford was the first to build his. The Leland Stanford mansion was designed to boast 50 rooms spread out over 41,000 square feet of lavish interior space. No expense was spared on his Italianate mansion clad with limestone and copper accents. Entering the home, you would pass through double doors and make your way from the antehall towards the rotunda, framed beyond marble columns boasting gilded capitals. As we continue forward, we begin to gain a sense of just how colossal this house truly is, and to make it appear even larger, mirrors were strategically placed in the corners. We won't go up the grand staircase yet to see what rests above the rotunda's oculus. Instead, let's turn around and begin exploring the rooms to either side of us. First, we are ushered into the reception room, where rugs are tossed over carpets and drapes are found pooling on the floors. This overabundance of rich textiles was meant to convey the excessive wealth of the family from the moment a visitor arrived. From the reception room, we will head into the drawing room, also known as the Pompeian drawing room for its illustrious frescoes. Set within an alcove is one of Stanford's most prized possessions, the Fountain of Love statue. We can move in closer to get a better look at its delicate features and further admire the finer details of the furnishings. Continuing our tour through the mansion, we find the gallery stretching away from the Pompeian drawing room. Bathing in natural light pouring in through a leaded skylight, Stanford displayed his extensive collection of paintings from the greats, some already several centuries old by the time he acquired them. Let's return to the entrance hall just below the rotunda. While we are here, we can look up, but only for a moment. We still have much more to see on the first floor before we explore the upper rotunda. Directly opposite of the reception room, we will enter the library, receiving direct sunlight through its massive bay window. On one side, the wall is dominated by the fireplace, the upper mantle of which soars 14 feet below the gilded frieze. Looking around, we find that half-height bookcases skirt the room, each book neatly organized with custom, leather-bound covers. Adjoining the library and heading towards the rear of the house, we find the billiards room. Continuing forward, we find that we've only made it as far back as the staircase. Let's head through the opening on our left. This brings us to Mrs. Stanford's sitting room, also known as the ladies' sitting room. Here we can imagine her meeting with her friends and relatives for more intimate conversations and perhaps a more comfortable setting relative to what we have seen so far. On our way to one of the grandest rooms in the house, we pass from the ladies' sitting room and through the conservatory clad in antique French wall panels. This brings us to the dining room, where we can imagine the table set with all its leaves to host dinner parties in excess of 60 guests. To one side, below a delicately hand-stenciled ceiling, the indoor fountain trickled in a time when indoor plumbing was still novel. Facing the bay window and consuming nearly the entire wall, the buffet was hand-carved by a team of artists where it sat. With the gallery back in view through one of the dining room's openings, we can see that we've explored most of the first floor. Before we head back to the entrance hall and rotunda, we can peek into the breakfast room. This is where the family would have dined when they were not entertaining, allowing them to have more casual time with one another. Let's step back into the rotunda and discover what wonders await us on the second floor. Arriving at the top of the staircase, we finally see the rotunda in all its glory framed by a colonnade. The ceiling is decorated in elaborate murals meant to depict each continent. In this one we see Africa. To the other end we see a depiction of Asia and steal a glimpse of what we can only imagine to be an intricate skylight crafted from wrought iron and set with leaded stained glass. Because we are guests in the Stanford's house, we will see the blue and gold guest bedroom first. From a marble fireplace to gilded accents and a mix of Greek and Pompeian motifs, this luxurious bedroom was meant to spoil guests. Mrs. Stanford's bedroom was every bit, if not more sumptuous, with a hand-sewn carpet spanning the floor and gilded festoons framing the ceiling's many murals. The view from her window allowed her to look out over the bay from the top of Nob Hill, but unfortunately, their life in this house was too good to last. In 1883, only 8 years after moving in, their only son passed away. Stricken with grief, they had the house emptied of all of its contents except for his bedroom, which they left as a shrine. The Stanfords, unable to bear any reminders of their late son, moved to Menlo Park, only returning to mourn. Though they never intended to disrupt their shrine, fate had other plans. The great 1906 San Francisco earthquake all but leveled the city. Even of the buildings that survived the initial shockwave, many of them were consumed by the fires that raged through the rubble over the following days. As the smoke cleared, all that remained of the Leland Stanford mansion was its foundation. Over time, the neighborhood was redeveloped, and today, standing on the same site, you will find the Stanford Court Hotel, its name in homage to the former owner of one of San Francisco's greatest architectural losses. While the story of the Leland Stanford mansion is tragic, its great halls were once bursting with masterful artistry. Pirates, gold, and near-death experiences make for a great story, but for some people, it was their actual life. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit that like button and let's explore this house. Born into a world of privilege in Amsterdam, young Joseph de Lamar's life took a dramatic turn at age 4 with the early loss of his father, a respected banker. This twist of fate ignited a flame of adventure in him. As a daring young soul, he ran away from home and stowed away on a Dutch vessel bound for the West Indies, marking the beginning of his lifelong adventure. The sea became de Lamar's first love, and he quickly rose through the ranks, becoming a ship's master by 20 and a captain shortly after. His voyages to the world's ports were not just travels, but a quest for knowledge, each destination enriching his understanding of the world, from finding the best in people to witnessing horrible acts of evil and cruelty. De Lamar's adventurous spirit found a new outlet in underwater salvage during the American Civil War, a venture that proved both profitable and perilous. During one of his salvage dives off the coast of Martha's Vineyard, he had a brush with death. While examining a shipwreck, his diving suit became wedged, trapping him for over 36 hours until he was able to be rescued. From that day on, he gave up diving, but continued with a spirit of adventure. De Lamar voyaged into the heart of Africa, navigating its rivers in a ship equipped with cannons, like an inland pirate, fighting tribes to claim treasures and trading with local villages. His success in his endeavor was as remarkable as it was fraught with danger, not just from sword fights and dodging arrows. No, these were things he and his men could manage. It was the deadly African fever that claimed many of his crew. Back in America, the call of the Wild Wild West lured de Lamar next, where he plunged into the world of mining. His ventures in Leadville, Colorado, and later in Idaho, Utah, and Nevada were marked by spectacular successes, transforming him into a mining magnate. His innovative approaches in mining technology, particularly in the refining processes, set new standards in the industry. Without regard for his worker safety, his companies became notorious for their job fatality rates, and de Lamar dominated the mines, unearthing loads of copper, silver, and gold, until he had gained a net worth of $29 million, the modern equivalent of nearly $600 million. In 1904, he built an imposing Beaux-Arts-style mansion on Manhattan's Madison Avenue and began trading stocks, only increasing his net worth. By the 1910s, de Lamar had transformed from an orphan stowaway and had become one of America's wealthiest men. He purchased 47 acres of land on New York's Gold Coast in Glen Cove and hired leading architect C.P.H. Gilbert to design for him not only a dream house, but an American palace. Coming in at 60,000 square feet, when it was completed in 1916, it was one of the largest homes to have ever been built in the United States. To begin exploring this colossal estate, we will pull through the front gate and begin making our way up the drive. Winding about the property, every inch of it has been professionally landscaped with hundreds of species of flowering plants maintained by dozens of full-time gardeners. The Beaux-Arts-style mansion was clad in limestone and complemented by rows of ornate balustrade. No surface of the mansion known as Pembroke was left untouched by the masterful hands of stonemasons and artists. Furthermore, not only were the grounds spectacular, but the earth was rammed to form terraces, pushing the mansion upwards to tower over Glen Cove as its crown jewel of architectural splendor. Even if you were to bypass the drive and arrive by boat, the long, horizontal frieze between the first and second floor mirrored the parallel shore below. Let's dock our boat on the pier and begin traveling towards the front door from the water. As a carriage arrives to pick us up, we will first travel past the bathing pavilion. Then we can wind around the Japanese gardens, seeing only the 70-foot private water tower breaking our immersion. Finally, we arrive at the sunken garden, the only thing now between us and the house. As we continue forward, butterflies flutter about the lilacs and rose bushes, planted and pruned to be perfectly symmetrical from the garden path. Let's now pass below the veranda and begin making our way inside, moving through the vestibule to arrive in the stair hall. Entering the mansion, we find that it is every bit as grand inside as it is outside, with the limestone-clad stair hall welcoming us to the interior. Directly ahead, and continuing in opulence, the living hall acts as the grand reception room where we will wait for our host to be announced. In the meantime, we can begin looking around, peering into other rooms in anticipation of what comes next. Dining room erupts with an assemblage of culture with wall murals spanning between a gilded cornice and salvaged European wall panels. The space is further decorated with antiques spanning centuries and regions apart, all anchored above an antique Persian rug. To the other end of the living hall, the den is staged with overstuffed furniture, providing a comfortable place for Delamar to carry on long conversations over cigars. From here, the formal elements of the home begin to relax as we enter the billiard room and realize that one of the largest and most expensive homes in America was designed primarily for relaxation with a small group of friends. Not only does the house contain a billiard room, but there is an entire indoor tennis court concealed behind its facade. But perhaps the most spectacular space lies at the end of the long corridor. Wrapped in columns with floor-to-ceiling windows, the adjoining tropical house was the showstopper of the estate. This entire wing of the house was designed as an indoor tropical oasis, going far beyond a conventional greenhouse to include a circular indoor swimming pool. And in the very center, you could cross a bridge and enjoy the humid air from a pagoda seemingly floating on the water. Delamar's private water park made headlines in various architectural publications of the time, causing a cascade of similar rooms to be built for other super wealthy individuals. Not even 2 years after Pembroke had been finished, Delamar suddenly and fatally contracted pneumonia, leaving his mansion to his daughter Alice in 1918. Pembroke was then placed up for sale and purchased by film magnate and founder of MGM, Marcus Lowe, who enjoyed the mansion until his passing in 1927. The estate was passed down to his son, who decided to demolish the mansion in 1968 before marketing the land to developers. Today, a neighborhood with 46 houses occupies the site, along with the Legend Yacht and Beach Club. If Pembroke would not have been torn down, it would still be one of the largest homes in the US, coming in at 26th place. Thankfully, we still have a handful of photos to remember the crown jewel of Glen Cove. Imagine building your dream house and filling it with nothing, just empty, open space. Why would anyone do this? Hi everyone, Ken here. Welcome to this house. In the late 1800s, John Plankinton was known all around Milwaukee for his real estate developments. He hired local talent and sourced local materials to construct some of the most beautiful mansions the city had ever seen. When his daughter, Elizabeth, was proposed to by sculptor Richard Hamilton Park, John wanted to give the young couple the best wedding present that money could buy. He commissioned Milwaukee-based architect Edward Townsend Miggs to design his daughter a towering Richardsonian Romanesque mansion. It was constructed from cream city brick with elaborate terracotta tiles and accented by granite columns. The mansion was to boast a myriad of artisan details in its ashlar and sandstone entablatures, as well as delicately crafted ironwork and stained glass windows. Just as the house was being finished, Elizabeth's fiancé was found to be living a double life. He had been seeing another lady, and Elizabeth called off the wedding. Upon the house's completion, she couldn't bear to move into it with all the memories reminding her of heartbreak, so she let it sit empty. Inside the empty home, we will pass through the front door and turn to the side to find the main hall. The main hall acts as a reception room, welcoming guests in front of a hearth. The walls and ceilings are clad in wood paneling, and just beyond this area, an archway boasting elaborate fretwork leads us to the stair hall. The grand stairs are carved from old-growth wood, with ornate balustrade terminating on newel posts capped by urns. At the landing, we can take a closer look at the artisan millwork, which her father paid a small fortune to have completed. Above us, the coffered wood ceiling is inlaid with handcrafted brass panels and broken up by layers of intricate trim. Opposite the stair hall is the men's lounge. The fireplace is set on a wall of mirrors, reflecting light from the oversized bay window. Each window was equipped with built-in shutters, which pulled up from their sills. Going further into the house, the next empty room took on a more Gothic theme in its wall paneling and boasted an elaborate plaster frieze below its coffered ceiling. We can imagine the reading room and library finished out with overstuffed furniture and freestanding bookcases, though the architectural elements are the only clues to the potential of these rooms. We can begin making our way upstairs to find the rest of the documented rooms. At the second floor stair landing, we can pause to admire the sheer level of craftsmanship required by the staircase. Then we can turn around to find the central hall, finished out with wainscoting, French doors, and a built-in mirror. The first bedroom we will see only has a detail shot of the fireplace, but what a sight it is, with its pencil-thin fretwork framing a mystifying stained glass window. The other bedroom we will see shares a similar perspective, though we can notice just how elaborate the millwork is, with wooden rosettes worked into the crown molding. Finally, we can make our way up to the third floor stair hall, which is flooded by natural light. Above us, on the ceiling, is a massive skylight, where the coffered ceiling transitions into a coffered cove ceiling. From here we can make our way down the hall and step out into the top of the tower to look out over Milwaukee. After sitting empty for 10 years, Elizabeth sold the house to a widow who lived in it alone until 1910. The Knights of Columbus purchased the house and built out several large additions. Then, in 1975, Marquette University purchased the building and presented plans for demolition. This caused a local uproar, and the following year it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places. Nonetheless, the university continued, arguing that it was a monument to Victorian bad taste, even though the Historic American Building Survey had noted that the mansion had a pristine exterior and an intact interior. Even with public sentiment in favor of saving the mansion, the university followed through with its demolition plans and expanded its campus to the side of where the house once stood, leaving an empty lot with nothing to replace the mansion. This event directly led to the creation of the City of Milwaukee Historic Preservation Commission the following year, in order to protect the dwindling supply of Milwaukee's architecturally and historically significant buildings from the wrecking ball. An empty mansion was reduced to an empty lot, but at least we have a handful of photos to remember it by. When we think about Tiffany & Company, we might imagine some of the world's finest products, but how much do you know about the designer who set their legacy in motion? Hi everyone, Ken here. Welcome to This House. Today, we are exploring Laurelton Hall, the home of Louis Comfort Tiffany. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. In 1848, Louis Comfort Tiffany was born to a highly respected and wealthy family. His father, Charles Tiffany, was the founder of New York City's Tiffany & Company, selling imported jewelry and precious stones, including some of the French crown jewels. The company had an excellent reputation as the world's finest retailer of jewels, and with that reputation came very wealthy clients who were happy to pay top dollar. This made Charles a rich man, so he built his Manhattan mansion at Madison and 72nd Street to raise his family. Louis was inspired to no end by the finest jewelry in the world which surrounded him. So it was no surprise that by the time he was ready to choose a career for himself, he decided to pursue art. After graduating from military school, he studied under great American painters such as George Inness and Samuel Coleman, later attending the National Academy of Design. After graduating, he set off to become a painter and made some truly beautiful artwork, but his interest quickly shifted. He had become enamored with glassmaking, experimenting with different methods to create stained glass. In his earliest work, he would use fragments of broken jars, the glass of which had been cheaply made and full of impurities. When he experimented with more expensive glass, he found that the lack of impurities led to the stained glass being too uniform, without the ability to refract and manipulate light passing through. He began introducing opal to his glass to create opalescent glass, and with his father's help, purchased a patent for the copper foil technique and opened his own glass factory. Quickly, he rose to prominence as one of the world's greatest artists, creating everything from Tiffany lamps to stained glass windows to finishing out entire interiors, such as the Mark Twain House in Hartford, Connecticut. This caught the attention of then U.S. President Arthur, who commissioned Tiffany to do the interior design work for the White House. Now with a successful career of his own, he began mass manufacturing glass products, which made him even wealthier. Around the turn of the century, he purchased 600 acres on Long Island, New York, and began designing his dream house. Finished in 1905 at a grand total of $2 million, or the modern-day equivalent of nearly $34 million, the 84-room Art Nouveau mansion was ready for Tiffany to move in. Here he had complete creative freedom to create a surreal landscape of ponds and fountains, connected by winding trails as he attempted to blur the lines between indoor and outdoor space. Rooms extended from the house into the gardens, with large seasonal rooms doing the same. As you explored the property, the house would surprise you with unexpected bridges and tunnels disappearing into the lush foliage. And where the house met the sea, a strict grid of geometrically based design emerged, existing as a buffer, transitioning the planar water into the built environment. The interior of the home continued with these nuances, with interior courts overgrown with plants and adorned with Islamic motifs crafted by Tiffany himself from mosaic tiles and glass. Fountains could be found in the vast atriums, with Tiffany's art glass mirroring the organic forms of the plants surrounding them. The centerpiece of the living room was a whimsical chandelier, cast and molded by Tiffany himself, with glass appearing to bubble over its delicate metal framework. To one end of this room, Tiffany saw every window as an opportunity to display his artwork, with intricate stained glass boasting scenes of people interacting with nature. We can only imagine the dizzying and glorious array of colors which would have flooded this space. Tiffany later added a chapel to his house, which he had designed for the 1893 World's Exposition in Chicago. He enjoyed living to create every day in his house, even hosting students for the Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation, where he would instruct creative minds. Upon his passing in 1933, he donated the house to the foundation, which later sold it in 1949. But 8 years later, in 1957, a fire broke out and consumed the house. Thankfully, one of his students was able to salvage most of the stained glass, as well as the chapel, to be placed on display at the Morse Museum in Orlando, Florida, where visitors can enjoy the largest collection of Tiffany glass in the world. Thank you all for watching. What did you think about Louis Comfort Tiffany's house? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. And while you're there, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode of This House. I would also like to take a moment to say a very special thank you to our This House supporters, whose names you can see on screen right now. If you would like to see your name on the screen and contribute to the production of these videos, join our membership program today. I'll see you next time on This House.